My name's Matt Nichols. This is my brother Tim Nichols.
Hey everybody.
And as she was saying, we do MrMaple.com, Nichols Nursery, and as well as MrGinkgo.com. Now, maples are by far the focus at our nursery. We do over 1,000 cultivars just on Pal maple, and we do close to about 250 other species of maples as well there in the nursery.
And we also do about another 200 cultivars of those species. So when you start adding up all of our cultivars, it starts adding up.
It's a little excessive.
We also do about 50 different varieties of ginkgo, and we do quite a lot of other rare woody ornamentals. We actually purchased Highland Creek Nursery this past fall, so we've been expanding our wholesale side as well. Brian Upchurch was one of the top speakers at the SNA conference last year.
It's opened us up to doing about 200 other types of woody ornamentals, as well as maples. But maples are by far the focus of our nursery. We're just maple geeks. We can't help it. That's our passion. Maples speak to us more than the other plants, and that's where we're driven to. And as a result, it's how we end up with 1,000 varieties. But we'll get into a little bit about introduction to maples too.
Yeah, and I'd say something too. My brother sits on the executive board of the Maple Society, North American Maple Society. If any of y'all really love Japanese maples, that might be a good group for y'all to join. And I sit on the executive board of the Blue Ridge Horticulture Association. I'm the vice president. And when it comes to Japanese maples, that's really our thing. Now, this presentation, the next one is basically why Japanese maples. Well, one thing about George Harrison, I don't know if y'all know, in his autobiography he said that first and foremost, he'd rather not be remembered as a musician first, but as a gardener.
Pretty good for a Beatle to say that. But actually, when I was in England for the the 2010 Maple Society meeting was in Belgium. I went over to England. I tried to go to his home in Friar Park where he has over 800 trees he planted in the 70s. And of course I couldn't get in because there's a million crazy beetle nuts outside trying to get in. So they wouldn't let me in the gates. But I got to go up to the gate and look in at the fall color. And it was legit. I mean, he was an obsessed maple collector like us. So I understood he shared that passion.
George Harrison also wrote that one of his greatest accomplishments was that he planted over 600 or 800 Japanese maples in Friar Park. He planted them himself too. And there's actually photos of him out there going out there and planting them. And that sort of shows you, one aspect of how great these things really are. Another one is actually Coach Pat Dow from Auburn University. He's actually another avid maple collector. If you go out there, you'll see tons of Japanese maples all around his place. And this is actually Coach Dooley and Michael Durr here. And if you ever have a time to go see Coach Dooley's house, what do you see?
Maples.
Japanese maples everywhere. He's a good customer of ours, good friend. And Michael Durr loves the Japanese maples there too. In fact, Michael Durr helps him get a lot of those different maples in the garden as well. Well, why are all these people loving Japanese maples? Well, there's not many plants that have such a diversity of spring color. If you look through here, you've got bright reds, chartreuse greens, different styles of variegation here. You've got Cigar-Nishiki here with the yellow margined variegation.
The middle one here is my mom's all-time favorite tree. This is Beni Shishihinga. The name means red and changeful. It starts out with that bright pecan green and then goes to like a cream on mint in summer.
And then my personal favorite is Higasiyama, which is up here in the top. The name actually translates as Japanese Umbrella Mountain. But oddly enough, it actually is just named after a mountain in the Hikasa region in Japan. But these have that bright pink variegation and goes to a cream, orange in the fall. Great Japanese maple from the 1700s, not used enough in the landscape.
Well, one of my favorites here is in the middle, the Makao Yatsubusa, and you'll see an excellent example of that out here in the gardens of SFA. There's a beautiful one right here, very small form, very dense habit. We recently decided we were going to start doing a Maple of the Year for the Maple Society as well. As the Conifer Society does a Conifer of the Year. It was one of the things we wanted to really push for. Happy to introduce the Makao Yatsubusa will be the 2015 Maple of the Year. So that'll be the first year that program's in place, and that'll be the first one. It's very popular for its density, excellent form, excellent heat-tolerant tree too.
And we're looking here at spring color. Next, this is actually summer color. I mean, you see summer color on these. This is, you just see reds, greens, malting colors, variegation, pink and reds.
This tree in the corner here is actually an Acer truncatum Akakazi Nishiki. So a lot of what we'll be talking about here are, in that category, if you will, of maples. This is very heat tolerant. Leaves out with more of a purple on green, but gets that light lime green there. In the far corner, again, that one's Shiranami, and you'll see an excellent example of that here in the gardens as well. Shiranami is one of my favorites as well. It's one of those 1700s list maples, very rare in the trade. It's not something you see very often. It goes through some of the best color patterns of any maple we do. It's one of those funny things. A lot of times in the trade, people are trying to reinvent the wheel, and they find out there's something that's been around since the 1700s that's spectacular. This goes through amazing color changes. Early on, this will be a bright, kind of almost that red color there, malting to an orange, and then late in the spring, almost a bright yellow before getting into a green. So it's really a huge spectrum of color changes in the early spring.
And then midsummer, you get the return of that bright red coloration on the new growth. Now I don't have any fall color, actually I do have one fall color photo of that on the next slide. But Sumagaki up here, I mean, you just look at the diversity here that we've got with summer color and you say, wow, that's pretty spectacular. Next, what Japanese maples are known for, fall color. You start looking at the diversity of these of yellows, oranges, reds, and everything in between, even pinks and...
Well, one of my favorite trees as a Japanese maple for fall color are the Acer japonicums. They just seem to never disappoint. That's what you see there in the middle right there. I believe that one's Yamakagi. Beautiful size foliage. Most of the Acer japonicums have a little bit larger foliage than we think of as a typical maple. Some like Vidifolium or Giant Moon can actually get foliage that's quite large. I mean, this almost kind of range. I've got pictures where it's just dwarfing my hand there with the foliage, but it makes a really nice palette for that fall color. Also, your japonicums tend to have like a malting phase where they have this bright red that you can see in the foliage behind that. There's that deep yellow veins behind that, so it really gets some intensity to it.
And this one here is actually in towards Washington at Weyerhaeuser, the National Rhododendron Garden, I believe, there. And soon you'll probably be seeing this out here because SFA picked up a wind gallon from us of demi-sec.
Great plant. I mean, the fall colors just, you know, you can get lost in that. It's so bright.
But the main thing I'm showing here is that we've got diversity in the spring, we got diversity in the summer, you got diversity in the fall. Well, what comes next? Winter interest. And when it comes to winter interest, you know, you've got a number of different bark that you can see here.
The Bihu up here in the corner, again, there's another great example of that out here in the gardens. Bihu is that bright yellow bark, a fairly newer one from Japan. Excellent yellow. I mean, the fall color is almost a deep golden yellow, and you can get lost in that as well when the stems and the bark are the exact same color. It's just, it's quite splendid. But a lot of these types like this, I almost enjoy them more when they're out of leaf. I tend to get out the camera whenever it's flurrying and just get out and get pictures of some of the coral bark types, you know, there in the snow, because it really makes a bright presence.
Now y'all may not be getting as much snow as we do up in the mountains of North Carolina.
We're expecting some Monday, but so we're enjoying your warm weather while we're here to the max.
But even just Japanese maples, even the ones that aren't coral bark, the ones that don't have bright yellow bark in the winter, they have gorgeous structures. That's one of the things about why people get out and they take photos of Japanese maples. You'll see they'll lay down with the camera and start taking photos of all the different structures. Because Japanese maples, they're just beautiful natural.
Very good architectural plants even out of leaf. I mean, a lot of your lace leaves you'll see are just starting to leaf out here, and you look at them structurally and they're just a work of art, really structural.
So here's another thing. This here is one called Benihime here. It rarely gets taller than a foot. This over here is an Asian palmetto subspecies palmetto. That's Mac. See his hand right there?
That's true. We've estimated that right about a 53-foot tree. Granted, most trees aren't going to be that size long term. This is the largest one we know of in America.
And height-wise. And you see we've got Japanese maples of all different sizes. And we've got less than a foot all the way up to 52 feet.
Which makes maples so interesting, because there's such a wide range of diversity here is what we're really trying to put across, is that, you know, people say, well, how big do maples get? And we say, well, you know, I've got some that get foot tall all the way, you know, several cultivars that are in the 20-year range at about 30 feet. And so most of the heights too, when we go through heights, and you'll see them on our website too, are relative to about 20 years. You'll see, you know, after the 60 to 70-year range, it kind of throws some of the heights out the window on some of these trees. But most of the heights you see listed for maples, especially in Peter Gregory and Berry Trees books, are relative to a time frame. Japanese maples that are grafted, so a grafted clone of a maple, should have over a 100-year lifespan. And And so, it is very relative because long term, it's going to keep living. It's going to be a big tree, long term.
And here's just some different shapes here. We've got ones that cascade. So they've got this habit of making this large umbrella. And then over here on this side, we've got a butterfly. And this is a Ace-chromatum butterfly. Just, great, fairly narrow, upright form. It just sort of shows you, again, where we've got just a huge amount of diversity.
Excellent part here about gardening usage. This line over here that you see that almost looks like a Sesame Street snuffleupagus, maybe an orangiola over there in the corner. That's at one of our customers' homes. And they've used that lace leaf, which is typically a 5x5 ball that's extremely pendulous. Orangiola is so weeping where a lot of your lace leaves are more of an arching shape, and they get a little wider than they do tall. Orangiola typically just mounds and makes more of a more symmetrical ball. They kind of use it as a hedge border there. You can see those four, there may even be a fifth one out of the scene there, of those orangiola, and they just kind of let them merge together in a big border. But just an excellent way to use that shape and that texture.
And instead of getting your typical cascading lace leaf shape, what do you get? The effect of mountains. I mean, it's spectacular with the use of Japanese maples as a sort of border mass planting.
Especially as you walk up to that in the fall, it's just like a small mountain range, or a really interesting way to do it.
And over here we've got a Japanese maple. Even though it's red, it's still being used as an accent plant here in this garden. Up here we've got a Japanese maple. That's actually over in Shreveport at the Norton Museum. And that's being used as a focal point planting, and they do great around waterfalls. So you see there's a lot of different uses, even in the garden, of very similar, these here are red lace leaves. Different ways you can just use that red lace leaf.
Often, in traditional Japanese gardens, a lot of your maples are used as background plants. And so you have a lot of your pines and black pines that are used up front, and then a lot of your brighter maple fall colors, those are used as accent background to bring in that color through the green. So behind the green, you have that kind of that blazing, almost like a sunset, if you will, color behind it.
And here's some mass plantings.
This is how we like to plant maples here. With 1,000 varieties, we're into mass plantings. We've got to do that by necessity at this point. But some beautiful ways to display maples. Different locations all around. This one's in New Jersey, Maryland. And of course, this is at the Portland Japanese Garden right here.
This is in Oregon.
And this is in Oregon, little Oregon there.
And this one here, this is actually one of our friends' gardens up in New Jersey. And every single plant almost, there's a few conifers, almost every single plant is a Japanese maple. And he's used them in a lot of different styles where you start looking around and you see you've got Japanese maples, accent plants, focal point plants. And it's just a big mass planting because, like we said, Japanese maples, they grow from 1-2 feet to 35 feet. And so when you start looking at all the different cultivars, you could really line up an amazing garden of just Japanese maples.
When it's laid out with texture and color and overall height, put into perspective, you can really make a beautiful, beautiful scene. And a lot of these are used, two very closely together on purpose so that you're kind of getting that just shock and awe of color in a mass planting.
Now, one of the great things about a Japanese maple is they've got an amazing root system, a non-invasive root system. This over here is not a Japanese maple. You see what this is doing? This is actually near the Biltmore estate. This is a Japanese maple here. Another very, very large one of the large ones.
Again, we use the big ogre here to show how big the tree actually is. You can compare me to the size of the tree and know this is a giant 45-foot tree.
Well, the great thing about this tree right here on the left is that it's planted right next to the foundation of a building. And yet it hasn't messed up the foundation. In all those years since the Biltmore estate, this old house, this old building, they've never had issues with it messing up the sidewalk, mat sanding on, and it's literally this far from the foundation of the building, and yet there's still not an issue. It actually grows up here. It's hard to see here in the shadow, but it goes up here and curves over for the roof, then goes up above the roof.
We think this tree was actually planted by Olmsted. A lot of the trees that are of comparable age at the Biltmore estate were planted by Olmsted, so we would estimate it probably in the same range with its height and shape. But an excellent example of how that root system is very non-invasive for Japanese maples. It's one of the really great points about maples. It's not something you have to worry about growing into a septic tank or growing into a water feature. We have 20-year-old Japanese maples in our yard that have huge bases for some lace leaves. and they're less than 3 feet away from a water feature, but you don't have to worry about it growing into the roots growing into that or being invasive, like you may have to some other woody ornamentals. This gives you a lot of extra planting room in a garden. You know, we're all running out of garden space continuously. It really is one of the best things about maples. In mass plantings, you don't have to worry about that root competition as much as you would some of the larger woody ornamentals.
And one of the great things about having that non-invasive root system is that they do great in containers. Japanese maples are great for that bonsai culture. They're great for putting on this is actually at Weyerhaeuser again, one of the most amazing bonsai collections. They had it closed the first time we went, and this was when we went to the back lot and got to go look at all the bonsai back in the back. But
the upper part here, that's actually our display garden there in western North Carolina. And you can see this is a Nacogdoches deep red up there in the container. We're just using that for some texture, but that tree actually lived in that pot. We just took it out last year. It was a gift to my uncle at his place, and that tree actually stayed in that pot for 12 years. Now, what you want to do after about the 10-year span is you definitely want to be adding more nutrients to the soil before that. But after that, you can actually root prune the tree during February when the dormancy's there, the tree's starting to break buds, it's really in the rejuvenation stage. And you can keep a Japanese maple like that size in a container pretty much its entire life by doing that. It'll naturally dwarf the tree down a little bit. Now, one of the main keys for container planting Japanese maples is drainage. Japanese maples like well-drained soil. They don't want to be boggy or wet feet. So the main mistake we see people making with container growing is not having very well-drained soil. So you want to make sure you're adding some extra holes to any of your containers, or at least providing a layer there of drainage.
And the key things there, like he's saying, good drainage. When you're in the south too, you want to make sure your plants get water. So make sure that it's a plant that actually is somewhere it's on the watering system or somewhere you're going to be watering it. But when you do that, you can bring your garden out to your deck, to your patio, to your pool, as you can see over here. And
there's a lot of versatility.
This is actually over towards Tyler, Texas. This appears in Atlanta. And it just really brings the garden to new locations, which is a fantastic aspect about Japanese maples, is that container planting.
This upper picture here is actually a good friend of ours, and his garden is primarily a container garden, and you can see around his pool area a beautiful home, and it really gives him a lot of versatility with a lot of his older maples he keeps in containers because he can continuously rearrange his whole yard with just a push truck there. But it really gives him a lot of versatility and a lot of interest to the garden.
And for a lot of people who collect Japanese maples, containers are fantastic because you can get more of them in your yard, which is good for them and good for us too.
But with the non-invasive root system, you certainly can keep a Japanese maple in a large container for quite a while. I mean, it really makes a great patio plant, deck plant. A lot of folks in apartments are saying, well, I'm moving soon, and we're like, don't take it out of this container. You could leave it in here for several years. I mean, it's already in a patio planter. Leave it in there for 8 to 10 years. It's going to do great. So.
Can it make it through the winters in that container?
Excellent question, and yes, it can. We've been down to -8 a few times in western North Carolina. Maples are good down to about -15 as long as they're dormant. The key there is when you have a container plant, you don't want to give it a false spring. And so what you don't want to do is, it's going to be really cold this week, let's bring the tree in the garage and let it stay in 45 for 2 weeks and start to get a little activated. Then take it back out once it's started to activate. That's when you get most of your shock from the colder weather, is actually when we've tried to protect them from the extreme cold, but we've put them back out a little too early. Leave them out. Leave them out year round. They'll do much better year round. In a really extreme cold, it's not bad to mulch, your containers or keep it a little more insulated. But all of our trees are grown outside in non-heated greenhouses year round in western North Carolina. They're good zones 5 through 9, so they can really take the extreme colds. And the key there too for the container growing in the winter is drainage, because you're not having that frozen root. You're not setting up cracked in the container or having like a hard freeze on the root. So when it's well drained, that actually helps that winter easier.
What about the size of the container? Does it have to be a certain size?
Well, depending on the cultivar of the tree, certainly a lot of the dwarfer, like the Nursery hemi or some of the dwarfer hemi forms, you can certainly use a much smaller container. What I recommend for most of the lace leaves, like what you saw on the last slide there, for a lot of the lace leaves, I recommend something in the 15-gallon size. We have trees in our nursery that are in 15-gallon containers that are 10 plus years old. So, I know for sure those root systems don't need a huge area. The key there is just well drained.
Then once you get to 15 years, you can either do a couple different things. You can pull that tree up, plop it in a bigger pot, put it in the ground, or you can pull it up, trim the roots off, and put it back in that same container and leave it for another 10 years. I mean, it's amazing the hardiness and the ability to grow in such horrible conditions for Japanese maples, but Japanese maples can still thrive and do well.
Very durable plants and really easy to do. I think container planting is one of the ways of the future for maples because, as people get less and less space, it's really a great way to enjoy Japanese maples.
And for people who don't have as much gardening space, say they're living in an apartment, they can have it at their deck. They can have it a lot of different places where traditionally people don't think about gardening. So another great thing about Japanese maples is they add value to your landscape. And these are just some Japanese maples in different areas. And once they get to these different sizes, I mean, Japanese maples are worth a lot of money. In fact, if you see listings for a lot of older homes, you start going through there, people will say 2 bedrooms, 3 baths, large Japanese maple in the front yard. I mean, it really does because some of these
can be quite an asset at that point right there, yeah.
I mean, some of the Japanese maples, when they're a cultivar Japanese maple and they're in your landscape, a tree that is, 12, 14 feet, that's thousands of dollars. And so it really adds value to your landscape where, some of the other trees may not add as much value to your landscape. And they just add a unique sense of class and sophistication that I really love. And this is over here at the Morris Arboretum. There's one in Oregon. There's actually one in Asheville. And this is Matt inside this tree right here. So we stepped inside of it.
Inside of it,
took some photos.
Shrunk there on that thing. It's quite a lot. In fact, the North American Maple Society meeting this October will be at the Morris Arboretum. So an excellent chance to come up and view some of these really old maples they have there in their collection as well.
So basically what we're trying to get here is that there's diversity in Japanese maples, like there's diversity in no other tree or shrub. I mean, what's another tree that has as much diversity in size, shape, color, form, with such an amazing root system that the beauty is not just above the ground, but it's below the ground too, so you can put it in containers and use it in a lot of different places in the landscape. You can't use a lot of other plants.
This tree right here in the middle, one thing we like to do at our nursery too is whenever we can, we go to the original cultivar. That's the original Burgundy Lace in upstate New Jersey at Vermeulen & Sons. It's huge. Again, you throw the heights out the window after 50, 60 years on some of these. That tree's probably in the 60 to 75 year range.
It was actually an introduction from the 1920s.
Yeah, it's an old
So this is the very original, and this was taken 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And if you look in the book right here, this is a 14 to 15 foot tree. And they say
relative to 20 years though.
It is, because all ages should be talked on relative to age. But now you look at this tree, you go out there, it's 30, 40 feet wide. So it's a pretty spectacular specimen.
And whenever we can, we like to go back to the original source to collect our sound material, just to get as close as the original cultivar as possible. One neat thing we do. And that's a little bit about our introduction to maples. If you have any other questions at this point, we've got several different presentations we'll get into. This is just the first one. We'll be getting into heat-tolerant maples for the South, as well as a little propagation too. We'll do a little bit of our IPPS propagation. So save your questions on those, but if you have any questions about this one, we'd be glad to take them now, or we can move right on into the next thing.
The little bright yellow, pale yellow, sure is the window.
It sure is.
That is one that will not be included in our heat-tolerant Japanese maples for the South. But it's Acer Shirasawa Arium. It's one of Michael Durr's favorite Japanese maples. It's the golden full moon maple.
Beautiful colors. I mean, lavender border to the bright yellow. One we like to do, I do Moonrise, which is similar in color pattern, but I think it takes our heat a little bit better, is Acer Shirasawa Moonrise. Now also
And
we do a lot
you have
of
that here in the garden, moonrise.
We also do a lot of your Shirasawa and palmatum hybrids, which they're not normally listed as a hybrid, but I think they are for a little bit of heat tolerancy. Jordan is an Acer Shirasawa that's going to give you that brighter color than that and a little bit more heat tolerant. Seasons of Change is another Shirasawa we do with a little bit more heat tolerance for the South. But again, Arium's a gorgeous color pattern. I mean, it is all taken in the early spring. Again, this is my mom's, like I said, all-time favorite. Our symbol for our website, of course, has to be Benny Shishihenga for her. That's her favorite tree.
How do you spell that?
Benny Shishihenga? We'll let him take that off.
It's BENISHICHIHENGE.
H-E-N-G.
HENGE. And the name translates as red and changeful, because to the Japanese, both the pink spring color and the orange fall color are different shades of that red.
Really a beautiful display. I mean, similar midsummer to butterfly, if you're familiar with that. That's almost its appearance midsummer as the butterfly, the cream on mint variegation. But a real bright display early on.
And Ms. Barber, would you like for us to go into heat-tolerant Japanese maples to the south next?
Or you want a break?
Or would you like a break?
People need a break? Let's just go right on.
We'll go right on
We'll
to
stop
that.
after Heat-Tolerant.
All right.
Question,
Yes.
heat tolerant, deer resistant.
Well, I live by the theory that if deer are hungry enough, they'll eat anything. There's several cultivars that you'll see a lot of these listed in some of the big box stores. You'll see an Abashigari, Tsumikiyama, and Crimson Queen and Garnet sold with deer-resistant tags. If they're hungry enough, they're going to take a munch on it. Often Acer circinatum is sold as deer-resistant. I think if they're hungry enough, they're going to take a munch on that too. So there certainly are types that are listed as deer-resistant. Now, what you really have to watch out for with deer is more of the horning and the working on their antlers there. That's more of a problem really than the eating munch. Typically, in our area of deer as well, they'll come along and they'll munch on a tree, but they don't decimate a tree from actual eating. Most of the time, they'll bite some of that new growth, and it's kind of bitter, so they're not really that interested in it. Now where you do have to watch out is, sometimes we'll put 3 stakes around a tree just to inhibit the antlers from getting in there.
The biggest thing to protect you from deer resistant, from deer and Japanese maples is look towards some of the trees that are later leafing, because deer don't like Japanese maples. It's not their first choice. They're going to go eat on a lot of other plants before they eat. But if they see something leafed out before anything else, they're going to walk over there and they're going to say, "What's this?" and start munching on that. And so typically, avoiding some of the ones that leaf out a little earlier are typically the things you can do to avoid deer. Because it's simply a factor like a little kid. Like a little kid sees a toy, they run towards it. They see something new in leaf, they're like, "Let's go over there and see what that is." But once everything's leafed out, they're going to start going for a lot of other plants besides Japanese maples.
Are you going to get into any identification of, say, if you don't know what this plant is?
Well, that's a good question. A lot of our responses are, what is this maple? Peter Gregory wrote this book, it's coming out on a book right now called What is That Maple? But it's more of a species identification rather than a cultivar. 9 times out of 10, when somebody says, what is this maple? It's typically a seedling. And so it's typically from seed, non-grafted Japanese maple. It's normally the response. You certainly can make educated guesses when you don't have a name at all, but to say with complete certainty, there's right about 3,000 cultivars of Japanese maples, and we can certainly point you in really good directions and give you a very good educated guess for nomenclature. We like doing that, and it's fun, and we can get really close to what a very good guesstimation. But a lot of types are very hard to identify if you don't know if it is a graft or not, because a lot of your seedlings are going to have a high level of diversity.
Now,
maples don't come true from seeds while we graft. We'll get into a little bit of the grafting part of things. But because of that, you can end up with two seedlings that are from the same set, and me and my brother don't exactly look too much alike, but we're brothers, so you can get up with a lot of diversity there in maples just the same.
To give you an idea, we were going to have Peter Gregory, the guy who wrote the book on Japanese maples, the 3rd and 4th editions. He was going to be speaking at our last meeting. He couldn't come, so we actually had another one of our friends substitute in for the keynote speaker, Talon Buchholz, and he actually did which maple is this. And what he did is he showed 80 maple cultivars, 80 maple species.
And you guessed the name.
And you had to guess the name of it.
Now, granted, there were like 80 to 100 nurserymen in the room. Tim tells you the story, by the way, to let you know that he won. So, I came in second, but he beat me. So, but
But
it's very difficult even among nurserymen and maple extreme enthusiasts to name every single type.
To give you an idea, I won with out of 160, won with a score of 84. So it is very, very difficult to tell from just one picture too.
I doubled the next guy and I had 64. So the next guy.
But the thing is that when you look at the Japanese maples, and if you can get a photo of the spring color, the summer color, and fall color, if you can do those 3 things and email us, A lot of times we can tell you if it's a name of a cultivar or of a species, and typically that's just simply the spring color, an up close photo of the spring color, the fall color, and midsummer. And if you can show those with the full form of the tree and with at least one photo of the full form of the tree and one full form of the leaf, we can typically point you and say it's going to be this cultivar or it's going to be one of these 3 or 4 things when there are very similar cultivars that are very similar.
And with seedlings, there's so much diversity. The disappointing answer most people get when they do that is that's an amoenum, that's an Acer palmatum subspecies amoenum, that's an Acer palmatum subspecies Matsumuri, or that's an Acer palmatum subspecies palmatum, which are the 3 main subspecies seedlings you see, because that's the most common, are the seedlings. Any other questions before we get into the heat tolerant stuff? We'll get into the heat tolerant maples for the south.
Yeah.
Here we'll actually go through a lot of the cultivars we prefer for the south and a little bit about their heat tolerancy and shape and design. Tamukiyama is the old classic. It's been around for forever. You'll see Tamukiyama in a lot of garden centers. It's a very common tree. But one of the reasons it is because it's a very durable tree as well.
The name actually translates loosely as hands folded praying on a mountain.
The name Tamuki is from the region that means hands folded praying, and then Yama meaning mountain. You'll see Yama repeated a good bit in Japanese maples. There's certainly definite words that you see repeated a good bit, and Yama is one of those. If you learn that, you know there's mountain at the end of everything with Yama on it.
The great thing about Tamukiyama is it's a little bit slower growth than a lot of the other red lace leaves, but it holds its color well in higher heat. Right now on the market, it's probably one of the best of the red lace leaves. We obviously are always trialing and trying to find the next best red lace leaf because that's something that's really important. We're always looking for improvements. And so we've got some coming down the pipeline, hopefully, that may beat it in the future. But for right now, this is probably one of the best of the red lace leaves to hold its color.
You'll see some great examples of Tamukiyama out here too. There's some wonderful plants in this garden. And as we go through heat tolerant maples to the south, you'll see a lot of things that are out here because these trees out here perform at a high level in a high heat environment. In fact, I use this garden as a reference a lot of times when people will say, will this handle full sun in Raleigh? And I'm like, it's full sun in Nacogdoches, Texas. Yeah, I think it will, because it's
if it can handle the pine forest over here, it can handle full sun in Raleigh. I mean, it's pretty much that. And people always look and they say, well, Japanese maples, how heat tolerant are they? SFA right here, where we're at, is probably one of the best examples of Japanese maples in the heat in the south. People always, they say, only these cultivars will do because they've dealt with 3 cultivars. They say, only these cultivars will do. You walk out here and you'll see a wide range of Japanese maples performing excellent here in the south. And it's all because
I think it really speaks, the diversity of the collection, and to brag on a little bit, but the diversity of the collection, it shows you that it's not just this cultivar, because as Tim was saying, a lot of folks will say, well, the Sakazuki does good because they've trialed that one tree in one area. What you're looking at here is a much broader spectrum, and you can make some generalizations by types, of some of the dwarfer types and some of the larger types about how that category performs. And they're doing really well here. In fact, they have an amazing size for the age of a lot of these trees, so sort of overperform.
And often someone will get one cultivar and they'll say, for instance, peaches and cream or something like that. And they'll take it and they'll put it in the shade. And they'll forget about it, won't water it. You have a drought or something the first year when it's trying to get established. And it'll die on the first year because they didn't water it when they had a drought. Or when the tree is getting established. And they'll say, well, these other cultivars don't do well. Peaches and cream is thriving and doing well out here in the garden. And you'll go out there and you'll see lots of new growth on it, flushing and doing great.
Cultivar is actually that cultivar was introduced by Yasmina Rare Plant Nursery in Australia. So a very high heat area there too. But we'll move on through some of these. And you'll definitely see a lot of plants from our heat tolerant maples that you'll see out here in the garden today you'll walk to. There's that awesome collection here.
Now, this is actually one of our favorite red lace leaves. And Tamukiyama is a fantastic tree. It's a slower grower. Anabe Shidari, while it does green up a little bit during the summer, you get a bright red spring color, bright, phenomenal red fall color, but much more vigorous grower. So if you're looking for a larger red lace leaf, one to grow much quicker, this one may be the red lace leaf for you.
It's only going to get about 5 feet tall, about 6 feet wide, but the beauty in this tree is it puts on its width first. And so it's going to put on a lot of width and have a very nice low spreading mound. And that really lies the beauty in this. Tim mentioned that it gets a little greener late in the season. Typically that's not until like July or early August you're going to see a little bit of green in there as the chlorophyll picks up. It actually protects the foliage a little bit, I think, in some of the high heat areas, so you'll see excellent fall color on this in a lot of high heat areas because of that. The fall color is typically a bright scarlet red.
And when you've got that green-red coming in and you've got red new growth on top of that coming out during the midsummer, it really provides a dynamic contrast for the tree as well.
Sekimori, you'll see some excellent examples of that out here too. J.D. Vertrees, who wrote some of the first books on maples, notes Sekimori as his favorite fall color for any of the green lace leaves. This goes to a really dynamic, deep golden yellow in the fall. I like this tree just in the summer garden at a distance. I mean, right at dusk, it's almost like a highlighter. I mean, it stands out, this low green. This tree is actually tucked away in the very back in a very shaded area, but a super heat-tolerant plant in general. Sekimori, high heat conditions. And a little bit more about the shape. It's more of an arching tree, where you'll see a lot of the lace leaves are cascading or pendulous. This one is cascading and pendulous, but a lot of the branching is very arching, and so it really tends to make a really interesting shape overall as it grows.
And I also have to say that this one here in this photo may not be the best example of the arching habit, simply because us, well, yeah, it's beside the chimney, and us and another nurseryman actually got our starts of Sekimori from this Sekimori here in the picture, and so I'm sure this has been trimmed up quite a bit throughout the years. At Therapeutic Gardens in Durham, North Carolina, there's an excellent one that's probably about this tall and probably about from me to Mount wide. So it has more of a
arching habit.
It's spectacular.
Hubb's dwarf, another beautiful dwarf with a good dense habit to it. Similar to Macaulay Yatsubusa, but more open. So it has that shingled layered effect. Beautiful heat-tolerant dwarf.
And for some reason, it must be something with my photo. Whenever I have this on the computer, it always pulls up with like a more of a pink new growth. And then every time I put it on a presentation, it comes up as more of a cream.
Washes out.
But
yeah, it's more of a pink growth there than the white you see. It's actually a lighter pink on the new growth. But a real heat tolerant, kind of almost has a contorted twist to the leaf too, which gives it a little something interesting as a dwarf. But in the 5 foot range of maturity, this tree handles high heat, even full sun, and very hot condition, as well as Macaulay Yatsubusa that we talked about in the last presentation.
in fact, the Macaulay Yatsubusa, which I didn't put in this presentation, handles heat extremely, extremely well, and it's probably one of the ones that it's very difficult to graft because it has such tight internodes for us to propagate. But once someone's propagated, it's almost impossible to kill.
It's tough. Hefner's Red has become a really popular tree for its color. It keeps that deep red really, really late in the season in high heat areas. This is about a 22-foot tree overall, so a larger tree. That's relative to the 20-year span. Deep maroons throughout the seasons. The fall color on this is kind of be more of a deep red as well.
Interesting note about this one, it was actually found by Hefner's Nursery in North Carolina. And what they were actually doing was they just had batches of red seedlings that they were looking through. Not really looking through, they're actually selling. And they saw one that held to the summer and they just pulled it back. And they said, this one's neat and different. It's really holding its color well. Well then, as time progressed, people said, hey, can I get some grafts off of that? People started realizing there's actually one of the Japanese maples that just holds its red better than any of the other ones. And so, one of the things to do is, when you're looking around at different trees, look at them in June, look at them in July, look at them in August, and see, well, how's this one holding up versus the other cultivars? And this is one that really, really does that fairly well. I mean, it does that as good or better than Emperor, is pretty comparable to Moonfire, a little bit taller in habit as well.
Baton Rouge, and again you'll see a really nice young Baton Rouge here in the garden here. This tree was found closer to Houston, Texas, growing full sun as a seedling. You'll see the comparison here. The left side, the leaf on the left side is Baton Rouge. The leaf on the right side is Sangukaku. Both of these are going to be coral bark types that have that red stemming like you looked at before. Baton Rouge is really heat tolerant. It takes a high level of humidity and heat for sure. And again, a little bit more of a red border to the tree early on too, than
And-
Sangu cactus.
You'll notice that this red border hangs on for a little bit longer than a lot of the other coral bark. For coral bark often may have a little bit when they first leaf out. Baton Rouge seems to hold on to it a little bit longer. And the neat thing about this too, Sangu cactus, benikawa, some of your other coral barks, they all have more of a yellow fall color. If they get stressed, they go to red. Baton Rouge often will go to a red fall color, which makes it really different and unique for a coral bark Japanese maple. Love the name though, Baton Rouge. It's French, translates as a red stick or red twig. Genius name for a great red winter interest, Japanese maple.
Red Emperor here, you'll see Red Emperor and Emperor 1 often listed. There's some beautiful Red Emperors out here in the garden as well. Classic for heat tolerancy. Red Emperor and Emperor 1 are actually synonymous. They're the same tree. So you may see Red Emperor or Emperor 1 out there in the trade. Again, we went back to the original source as much as we could. We went and talked to the apprentice who worked for Dick Wolf, who named the tree. And we got it back from the source that they were the exact same tree before we went forward with that. So you'll see Red Emperor and Emperor 1 out there a good bit. Classic red upright. This is actually Dick Wolf's original plant right here, his original stock plant of that. So that tree is probably 50 to 60 years old in that range. Typically Red Emperor, one of the reasons it's so popular is it's going to be in the 15-foot range in 20 years. It'll actually get to 15 feet quicker than Bloodgood, but then slow down. And so you'll see Red Emperor hold its color. It performs much better in high heat conditions than Bloodgood does for us. Kind of a glossy sheen to the leaf too, which gives a little bit something extra too.
It's funny finding a lot of these heat-tolerant trees. While we can find a lot of them here in the South, when you're looking, there's a lot of them that are found in places like North Carolina. This one was found in Pennsylvania. So I mean, it's amazing once they find these and then they start putting them in further south to see how they actually do. And there's a lot of plants when people say, well, is this heat tolerant? Really the best way to do it is to get it down here and try it for yourself. And, I mean, that's the only way, that's why SFA, thanks to Dr. Creech and Barbara, and that's why they have such an amazing garden out here. They didn't listen to anyone that said, oh, you need to stick to these 3 Japanese maples.
You never listen to anybody.
Exactly. About any plant, but I'm glad they didn't with any Japanese maples.
It certainly works though, and that's how you prove these things are heat tolerant on these trials. And you'll see Red Emperors out here that are huge, beautiful, gorgeous shapes.
And here's just an up close photo of the leaf. And here's this starting to go to fall color. It's a little bit shaded so you can't really see all of its splendor, but you can see right in there those bright crimsons to scarlet.
Fall color always depends on your moisture conditions and some of your coolness, so fall color can vary between year to year. This is one tree that some years you'll see it be fire engine red in the fall. I mean, beautiful fall colors and an excellent heat tolerant tree. When people ask what my favorite choice for a high heat upright red is, for shape, structure, durability, heat, and ability that it leaves out late too, so it's kind of nice because you don't get burned, or, with the late frost or something there too, so a little cold tolerant aspect. Probably my favorite upright red for the deep south.
Now next, I guess that there's a little bit out of focus there. This is Sadie. It's the only upright lace leaf in the trade, and it's a green upright lace leaf. And you'll sort of see here, you see a little bit of the form here. Here's a mature plant here.
Where most of your lace leaves we were looking at earlier are going to have that cascading umbrella shape. I'm sorry, by the way, that's too big for the screen sometimes. Has it more of that cascading umbrella shape, most of your lace leaf? Seryu is a true upright tree. And so it gives a real majestic open look. It's actually a lace leaf you can go stand in and stand under. This kind of gives it a real open airy approach, especially as it's blowing the wind. But a gorgeous tree, bright chartreuse green in the early spring, deep Kelly green late summer, and then the fall color is a really dark burgundy, so deep red in the fall. But that's an upright lace leaf called Seryu.
Now I will say that sometimes people will say, I've got a yellow strand of Seryu or an orange strand of Seryu. The neat thing about this is that certain years, certain environment conditions can actually change the fall color on this one. Because you can take that exact tree and then they have an odd weather occurrence and then it's a red fall color.
You definitely will see some variability from different climates and different areas. And that season too, this year's been a really weird season for us spring-wise. Some years, last year our fall color was relatively uneventful. So there are some years where the year before that, it was get your cameras out, spectacular fall color. There are some conditions there depending on the coolness and the water and how dry it gets. I mean, really our fall color is a tree going into a little bit of stress. So you want a little bit of stress. You don't want it to be too lush and too rainy and too perfect, or you'll just kind of gradually get fall color.
Now, with this here, you see this here is a chartreuse green. This is early spring. I need to get a better photo of it midsummer. The name Stereo actually translates as blue-green dragons. Ryu means dragon. And so basically, midsummer it goes to a bluish green, which gives it a really unique aspect to the tree, especially if you get a little bit of shade. And that's really where the tree gets its name.
It's a tree that can handle full sun in a lot of high heat areas, but by giving it a little bit of shade, it almost gets that emerald kind of color to it, he was saying, where it does. I always thought, well, why is it blue-green? And then we started growing some in deep shade, and we're like, okay, it makes sense. I mean, it almost has that emerald, darker green appearance to it, and you can see why it has that. Some of the other species too, we grow a lot of species trees in our nursery. Acer fabri is an evergreen maple in section palmata. So people are quite shocked normally when I say we grafted this onto the same understock as all the Japanese maples you've been seeing. This is just there in section palmata. There's a beautiful example of that out here in my gardens too. You're in a great climate to grow some of the really weird evergreen maples. And one of the fun things about this tree is when people come to the garden, they go, you can say, what is this? And they'll never guess a maple.
We often call this plant a master gardener stump plant.
They love it.
And that's just because when we do a lot of master gardener talks, and we'll pull up a photo of just the leaves and say, what is this? And obviously they know we're maple people, but they just, sometimes they'll sit there and they'll be like, what is that?
You can see with the samaras here, the seeds that are falling down, it really has a beautiful fruiting aspect to it too. The nutlets are almost a deep burgundy, the bright pink some seasons, and it really gives it an interesting complement to the dark green evergreen foliage.
Now, Acer fabri, often called Faber's maple, not so good on the common name there. But Donling Jane of University of Georgia, he actually calls it the emerald jade maple, which I like quite a bit. And he's from China. This is one of his favorite maples he often talks about. It's one of our favorite maples, especially when it comes to the evergreen maples. It's actually in section palmata. So in that same grouping, it's much closer related to your Japanese maples. It's like a sister or a brother to the Japanese maple. In that close related family, we can graft this onto a Japanese maple. Thrives just fantastic.
One of the things we did yesterday was run out and check the one out here, and it stayed pretty evergreen, even considering we've had a colder than normal winter, which is really interesting to us. We're growing a lot of these that they've brought back. Mark Weatherden's brought back from J.C. Ralston and give us different sources of this. And the interesting part is they're coming from more cold tolerant areas in China, so we're wondering how deciduous it is for us as an evergreen tree in really colder climates. So we're kind of looking at it from a different perspective, where here it's going to stay evergreen and perform at a high level. For us, sometimes we get a little bit of fall color on our evergreen tree and starts to drop foliage, but it's still super healthy for that area. But it's not always fully evergreen in our environment. Where here, you get that year-round foliage.
Extremely heat tolerant. I know we're not talking about cold tolerant maples, but we had -18. I mean, we had -18 at our house. Trees are in containers. -18 with wind chill. We got down to the negatives, and then wind chill took it to -18. And these maples are still thriving and doing well. And you think these maples are pretty dang hardy.
I think we were right about -8 was our temperature at that time. It was cold. But again, the fruit here you see on that is just a gorgeous display. Akashigatatsu sawa. This is, and you'll see a nice one of those in the garden here as well. Akashigatatsu sawa has bright reticulated veins to it. So as you look at this variegated maple, it just kind of has this very almost ghostly quality to it, like some of the ghosts are named similar foliage there. It just has this very illuminating reticulated vein down the middle of the tree. Aka meaning red. Leaves out with more of a red tint to that pink foliage.
Now, something very unique about these maples. This is another maple from the 1700s in Japan. One of the neat things is about each one of those Japanese maples from that 1700s list has a Japanese poem that goes with it. When they were in their catalogs, the very first recorded history of these Japanese maples actually has poetry that goes along with each one of these trees. And so when you go back and look at this is red snipes flying up from the swamp in the morning. And then it continues on with a little poem, a little haiku about that maple. or not necessarily about that maple, but about the red snipes flying up from the swamp in the morning, which just sort of shows you the romanticism that was in Japan and gardening with the Japanese maples from the 1700s. And it really brings a new sense of beauty to it once you start looking at the Japanese maples with those poetry as well.
A very heat-tolerant tree. We do recommend, shade for this tree. Definitely late-day shade.
Now,
you don't want a lot of late-day exposure.
I will say that one of our good friends down in Georgia was just telling us that they had this tree in full sun in Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
And so if it can handle full sun in Atlanta, people have always, we've always said recommending the shade. Once I heard that last, it was actually, maybe try it. Maybe try it and see how it does, because there's an opportunity that it may actually do well. We all often see this type of irrigation and we say, give it a little protection from the hot afternoon sun. But, if this is, sometimes go ahead and try it, even when people say that, because this is just when people see this, they say that's going to get burned. But I have heard of one person who had this in full sun in Georgia, and it did fantastic for them. And so there's an opportunity there's a chance that it might do well here in the sun. But to be safe, give it a little protection from the hot afternoon sun. And here's it in fall color here as well.
Beautiful display. This tree is actually in full sun in Simpsonville, South Carolina, and in a pretty high heat area there too, right outside of Spartanburg, South Carolina, as you get a little closer toward the central part of the state.
Now, the neat thing about this tree here is that you've got most Japanese maple a lot of times you see has more of an upright habit. This one has more of an arching habit. It's a Matsumuri. And so it comes up and it arches out a little bit. And so it has a very unique shape to it. And it's not going to get really tall. It's going to be, right around the 6 to 8 foot range in 15 years. And just a nice dwarf, great fall color. Really neat tree.
Poopy palmatum. This is another species tree we thrown in here. See how we try to sneak the species in on you in the cultivars? A lot of times people were like, oh, species. But I really like Acer species. There's some really cool ones. We're looking through cultivars. We looked through a lot of seed of these too, looking for unique and interesting new traits. This is an excellent plant for the South. In fact, it's extremely heat tolerant. It's actually a maple from China, the Poopy palmatum.
It's extremely heat tolerant and drought tolerant, which is a fantastic plant for Texas. Now, the neat thing the reason why you don't see these out here is because they're not common. They don't have a common name. It doesn't say bloodgood next to it. It doesn't have something that people can relate to immediately, because it's a fairly recent addition into horticulture from China. It actually grows just like a Japanese maple. You look at it, you're going to think it's a Japanese maple, more heat tolerant.
One of the ways we make it a little softer too, to get into some of the species, we call it the Go Wild collection. And so we actually introduce those and there's really cool adventures around all the species trees you see too. I mean, a lot of times that's a tree that someone like Dr. Creech has went and wild collected in this province in China. There's a whole really interesting adventure that goes along with why this is here in America. And as calling it the Go Wild collection, we kind of emphasize those plant adventurers who get out there and find these really cool things for us to have here in America.
Our Acer Poopy palmatum strands, the ones that we have available, actually came from a guy named Stan Tyson from Illinois. He was actually doing some plant expeditions around China, and before he went to the Shanghai Botanical Garden, he saw a lot of Acer Poopy palmatum growing on the hillside. So he went up, started collecting some seed, brought them back to Illinois, and then a few years ago, he did that in the 70s. He sent us some signwood on it, and we started propagating it. And
super heat tolerant. Again, this is in section palmata, so we graft this right on to the same understocks we would any other Japanese maple. Excellent fall color on this tree. The fall color I would compare to a Sakazuki. Bright red, a Sakazuki is often in Japanese maple. It's noted for having one of the best red fall colors. It's just blazing red. Poopy palmatum, this is a younger tree, so it's not quite as big of a presence, but amazing bright red fall colors and super heat tolerant.
now, another thing about this tree is as this tree matures, typical Japanese maples, green bark, matures to like a brown. This one here has striations, so it'll be green bark with white striations going through the bark, which gives it a really unique look, very different from a lot of the other things considered Japanese maples. Now, one thing to note too, when I say this is from China, if it was more common, it would actually be in the book on Japanese maples. Acer circinatum, which is actually indigenous to the Pacific Northwest, they consider a Japanese maple because it's in that section Palmata. And so they would actually say, oh, this is a Japanese maple when they're putting it in the book because it's very similar, almost identical. It's very similar form, similar characteristics, that good non-invasive root system, which really...
What's I'm saying here too is this is in the same genre and same family, so it's right there and very closely related to what we consider Acer palmatum, but it may be able to take even higher heats and some more extreme conditions.
Exactly.
Biniotaki, the name means red bamboo. Great plant. Biniotaki, you'll see some nice ones here too. There's a really old one. A lot of the maples in this collection are just gorgeous trees. Some of the really older ones come from Sherwood Aiken's collection, and it's just a wealth of trees there. I mean, it really is a beautiful collection. Biniotaki is one you'll see out here though in the gardens, and you can see why the name means red bamboo. It has that lunar lobulum style leaf, so it has a heavily divided look to it, and it almost gives the tree the appearance of an upright lace leaf. Actually more of almost like a bamboo divided type of foliage. Excellent tree, very heat tolerant. Biniotaki is going to be in about the 18-foot range in 20 years.
The thing about it here is you've got this fairly narrow form to it, so it fits in smaller spaces. You've got that thin leaf that looks almost like a red lace leaf. You get exceptional fall color. And Biniotaki, that red bamboo feel that gives that ornamental feel without having to deal with the invasive root systems of bamboo. It's an excellent, gorgeous tree. With a name like Biniotaki, you think this is one that came right out of Japan. Oddly enough, came from a guy in Washington named Ed Wood. He was a plant collector, enthusiast, really smart plantsman. What he'd do is he'd look through tons and tons of maple seed and all the types of plant seed. Then he would host these banquets, and he would sell tickets to come to his banquet, and they'd have a dinner. Then he would have an auction up front, and all the nurserymen from the Oregon, Washington area would come in and make bids on his plants, on what they wanted to buy. And when they bought it, they had propagation rights to take that plant and introduce it. And Biniotaki was actually one of the ones that came out, and probably one of the best of Ed Wood's selections of Acer palmatum. And in the gardens, I didn't talk about, you will see one called Redwood. And Redwood is actually a coral bark selection from Ed Wood.
Shalena's Beauty.
Now this isn't a Japanese maple at all. It's just an awesome maple. It's very heat tolerant. We like this tree a lot.
Bright yellows on greens. This is actually a Acer freemanii ex rubrum. So it's a hybrid between rubrum and a freemanii. Beautiful spring colors. Bright yellow on green. This is actually a midsummer color. This has been trialed in some very high heat areas in Jacksonville, Florida in full sun. So it is holding up very well for a variegated plant for high heat areas.
Once this plant gets its roots established, they don't see any burn on the variegation. When the plant's first starting to get established, you may see a little bit of burn. But the neat thing...
That first year when you first put in a plant too, you're getting, the root system's getting established there. After that first year, that root system's already put out a lot more roots, and it's taking up energy more efficiently. And so that first year, it is more important to keep with a heavier watering regimen with any maple, because that first year, it's not going to be as efficient to get energy.
Now, the thing is about this tree, throw out the root system things we talked about with the Japanese maples. It's got a more invasive root system. But the thing about this tree is that it can handle high heat. It grows really quickly. So it's a gorgeous tree you can put in your yard, let it grow up, a few years, plant in your yard. You can plant Japanese maples underneath it if you need some of the ones for the shade. So it's a great ornamental maple. I mean,
See a little bit of the pink new growth here. I believe the next picture is more of the fall color. Oh, let's get into Shishikashira.
Yeah.
Excellent color display. You'll see some awesome Shishikashiras here in the gardens. We were taking some pictures of some of the ones out here yesterday, just starting to unfurl. Shishikashira is another one of those maples from the 1700s list. A lot of folks call this lion's head. You'll see it often sold, do you have lion's head Japanese maple? Well, it's not really a true translation. The name doesn't mean lion's head. It refers to a specific lion in Japanese literature. So it was actually a Japanese play with a shishi, the ojishi, and is it majishi? As the cub, so it's the male, female, and baby lion. Well, Shishikashira, there's actually a tree that relates to each of those. We have ojishi, majishi, and then Shishikashira. All three are beautiful plants. You'll see Shishigashira, a little more common in the trade. Excellent heat tolerant plant. Can handle really high heat conditions, very little leaf burn. When it first leaves out, it's this very dark, almost more a very full bold green. And it keeps that color throughout the summer completely. Like late summer and early spring colors are almost identical on this plant.
This is one here in full sun in Raleigh, North Carolina. And when you have this one in full sun, it's actually a smaller dwarf tree, 4 to 6 feet. If you put it in the shade, it's not that the tree is healthier, but it stretches for more light. And so the tree might not be as wide, but it will actually be a little bit taller. And very, very heat tolerant tree, does fantastic.
Very popular tree too for this odd form for bonsai. I mean, a very interesting growing shape.
And you can sort of see where it gets this lion's head name because of this twisted, curled habit to the leaves. The tighter compactness almost looks like a lion's mane to it.
Jeannie's Dream is an introduction from central Alabama. Very high heat tree. Jeannie's Dream leaves out with a bright pink, and it keeps that bright pink a lot of the summer. Even late into the season, a lot of people come into our greenhouses and they're like, what is that? Late in the season when things have kind of lost their bright spring flushes of growth and they've kind of went into more of the summer color. It's a very spectacular tree for that time of year.
One of the neat things about this was an introduction by one of our friends, Dr. Bill Shell, or Dr. William Shell. He does a lot of things with grafting and teaching people to graft. When people first find grafting and start Google searching it, often they'll end up finding his website and then he'll be like, oh, come down here and learn with me, and people will drive down to his place and all that jazz. But this is actually a fantastic selection. When we first were walking through his yard, he was like, grab some signs of this. I named it after my sister. It's a red I found I really like. And we're like, well, another red upright, we'll graft it. Bill knows trees. Well, when we grafted this tree and put it in our ton, we've got tons of 1 gallons of Japanese maples and 3 gallons. People come to the nursery and they're looking for a red. Often they'll pass over a lot of the other trees and walk straight to this one just simply because the leaf is very different. It's a little more divided back. Not quite a lace leaf, but it's a little more divided back and gives more of an elegant feel for a red upright.
Seasons have changed. This is, asked about Shirasalums. This is one of the most heat tolerant Shirasalums we do. Interestingly, this is late summer flush of growth there. It actually has a very dark purple bark to it, even as it matures. So it's almost like a coral bark for purple bark. I mean, it's a deep, deep purple on the bark. This is a new growth flush, which isn't actually that typical of the foliage. It's just really neat looking. It's going to be a deep purple when it first leaves out, and then getting to a deep green late summer. But it has that full moon, it's a full moon maple being a Shirasalum. I think there's some palmatum influence there. It's probably a hybrid between palmatum and Shirasalum. And that certainly adds to the heat tolerant aspect for this tree as well.
And this tree was found by one of our good friends, Crispin Silva. And what we do when we trade silent wood is when we find someone that has the original, we send them wood and try to get from the original tree. And that's exactly what we do. And so all of our seasons of change came directly from the original, which includes the one that's came in 1 gallon for SFA.
Excellent plant for you. Love this plant, and a very heat tolerant Shirasalum.
And it'll go through molting phases throughout the year where it just has different colors in the leaf, and it really makes this tree really unique and special.
One of the reasons it's called Seasons of Change is it kind of looks like it's continually getting a little fall color all summer. Lillian's Jewel, one of the real striking trees we do. This is a variegated Matson Murray style leaf, very rare, interesting type. Bright pink on red variegation. This tree has trialed very well for us in high heat climates. We've trialed it in a few high heat areas in Georgia and South Carolina, and some areas where it's going to get, not really as much care. And so we saw that it's a very high heat tree for a variegated tree. Now, this I would definitely recommend late day shade for and a little protection. But as far as some of the bright white variegates go, it is on the upper scale for heat tolerance.
And this is actually named after one of our friend's daughters, Lily Ann. And so whenever we have our friends and then they have one's named after their daughters or named after their wives or named after them, it really means a lot more to us because we know them and we're like, oh, there's Lily Ann.
It's kind of neat. I got to go over to Esfeld Nursery in Holland back in 2010 too, and it was kind of weird because I corresponded with Cor Van Gelderen several times over the internet, and it was fun to actually meet the family and be like, well, I know your tree, because it's all family names. I know Reuben, yeah, I got your tree. And Ariadne, yep, I got your tree. So you start to meet the whole family really through the trees they were named after before you see them.
And it's just a spectacular way to really remember somebody, and at the same time, Lillian's Jewel is just very poetic.
So does that white variegation in the red stay, or is that just spring color?
Now with this one here, it will lose this is spring color. We'll go to a little bit midsummer of like a
Pink on red, not the white. Some of the white, now the new growth flushes will have white in it, but it's more of a pink on red midsummer.
Wow.
So you'll see more of what you see in the corner pink there.
This is probably one of our rarest maples. Shortly after introducing it, the person who did this went out of business. And we were actually one of the nurseries that got a hold of it. And
one thing we look into doing too is whenever possible, and a lot of the older nurserymen out there's some real treasures. And so a lot of people, like we said, are always trying to reinvent the wheel. And a lot of these guys just had great plants, and it's keeping their collections going and keeping those plants from just disappearing too. I mean, we make every effort we can to go and meet with folks and say, what's the coolest thing you introduced? What's the coolest thing you want to introduce? What did you want to introduce? And there's some really awesome plants that, unless they're continuing to be produced and out there, they tend to disappear with some of the old nurserymen. So. Hagaroma. This is Tim's favorite leaf structure, so I'll let him talk about this one.
So this is the old nurserymen call this a sessilifolium type leaf structure. And I call it a feather type leaf structure because it looks more like a feather. Sessilifolium, it's getting Latin. We're just going to use common English here. It's a feather type leaf structure.
Tim's obsessed with this type of leaf structure so much that there's really only about 3 to 4 types of these you'll find typically anywhere in the nursery trade. I think we have about 14 to 16 in our nursery, different named cultivars with this leaf, because Tim has to have every single one.
We track them down and make sure that we find them. If they're out there, if they're in America, we've got them. But we do that with all Japanese maples. So if you say that with we have 1,000 varieties. But at the same time, this has a really unique leaf structure. You see, this here is not the full leaf. It actually goes all the way back there and connects, and then there's another small leaf that comes down here. So all of these feathers are actually connected. This is an upright tree, so it gives a really soft, elegant feel to an upright tree. There's Hagoromo. There's another one called Koshimeno. Hagoromo is right around the 10-foot range. Koshimeno is around the 15-foot range, a little bit faster grower. They have a bright scarlet to bright crimson fall color, which really provides a dynamic feel.
Excellent fall color. And again, the leaf structure is just more of a small feather shape. Beautiful. It really gives an elegant, upright appearance to the tree too. I mean, it's not a lace leaf, but again, it has that kind of texture to an upright lace leaf. And when this is in fall color, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous plant too.
And if you've got an area that's not super windy but has some wind to it, this is definitely one that when it blows in the wind, it really looks elegant.
Gives it more of a majestic look to it. Orangiola, we showed that big picture in the last presentation, and the ones that look like the snuffle because
the mass planting on the border.
Orangiola is very heat tolerant dissectum. One of the reasons I like it, it's a little bit different than most of your typical red dissectums. Orangiola leaves out with tons of shades like this, as you see. This is a spring color photo here. Tons of different shades. One of the reasons I like it is it has a good midsummer interest. Orangiola, as it continues to mature throughout the summer, will have pink new growth, like reddish pink new growth, orange or mid growth, and then the old growth is green. So it almost has a 3-tone texture to the tree in that cascading umbrella shape. Really, I think it's actually its neatest looking pattern midsummer, which is rare because you think it's spring color and fall color for maples.
And we went out and tracked down some of the original ones to see how big some of the original ones were that were introduced back in the 60s and 70s. I mean, this is a Japanese maple has won the Royal Horticultural Award for Merit. It's extremely heat tolerant, extremely durable, does great in this area. But, the original trees that were so old, they got large calipers to them. They're only about 5 foot tall, about 6-7 foot wide. And for that kind of age to a lace leaf Japanese maple, you know that it's a true dwarf when it's in that size and that shape. But just an amazing, amazing spring color. You just see the array of reds, of different shades of red you see right there. It's just simply amazing. And
There's again that same photo from before. This is actually a midsummer photo, so you can start to see a little of the green here on the larger picture of it. But excellent shape. Nishigawa, you'll see an excellent Nishigawa here in the garden as well. Super heat tolerant, very popular in Japan. Often in Japan, this is the most popular type of maple you can get are these pine bark types. Pine barks are heavily sought after for bonsai enthusiasts. It's a Japanese maple that's going to develop this fissured, thick, rough bark to it. Nishigawa is super heat tolerant. There's one out here, Dr. Creech just kind of had it limbed up a little bit so you can get under it and look at the bark a good bit, and it's really kept that structure really pretty. And it's an excellent example of a rough bark Japanese maple.
And there's a couple different ones that are very similar. The Ibo Nishiki, Arakawa, and Nishigawa. And all three of them are fantastic plants. Nishigawa is the reason why it's so heavily sought after in Japan is because what this plant does is it gives you the appearance of age. So basically, you can have a smaller tree that has the pine bark all over it, and the tree gives the appearance that it's very old, it's been there for a long time. And so it gives it this own little setting for that garden, and you look at it and you say, wow, that looks like it's really, really old. Well, it may not be necessarily that old, but it just really gives a great appearance of having that age, which makes it great for when people paint the portraits with bonsai. They're figuring out how they're going to make this bonsai look to have this age. It's also great in the garden for that exact same use.
Another reason it's so popular for bonsai too is it's just tough as nails. I mean, it's a very durable, high heat tree. And there's a testament to that right out here because the tree is gorgeous. I need to get some more pictures of the bark before we leave. Excellent barking on that tree. And a great fall color. This is a remarkable fall color for a coral bark, a pine bark.
People always talk about this when they say, excellent bark, period. They forget about the fall color. I mean, the bark is the thing that makes it stand out, but this fall color is just, it's amazing.
I think Tim took a picture of this and put it on our Facebook last year, and it said, it's electric, boogie, woogie, woogie. Because it was like glowing. I mean, it looked like somebody plugged it in. Relish, this is a very new cultivar. This is a midsummer photo here. This tree, it's interesting. Early on, the variegation isn't quite as interesting in the early spring as it is midsummer. You look at it in the early spring and you're like, that's cool, but it doesn't stand out from the crowd. Midsummer folks come into our nursery and they're like, what is that? Because it almost gives it a blue-green tint to it midsummer.
And Barbara, I think this one's going to do really well for y'all down here. The thing about this one is that when it gets towards that hotter peak of the summer, you get brighter chartreuses and more blue-greens. And so the variegations peak during the hotter part of the summer. And this is a dwarf tree. The original name was Sita Tame, and then our friend decided to go back and name it Relish. And I think she actually named it after the food relish. I like to say we're going to relish this beauty because it's fantastic. It's simply becoming one of my favorite midsummer Japanese maples. You walk through the nursery, and right when a lot of other things, the variegations look beautiful in the spring, starting to fade a little bit, this one's going right towards its peak. And it turns to oranges to reds in the fall. It's not too tall a grower. It's about in the 5 to 6 foot range. And from everything I've heard in Georgia, they've had it in full sun, and it can probably handle full sun here as well. But like always, whenever we get to variegation, we always say, if you want to do it safely, plant with protection from the hot afternoon sun.
Another species maple here, Oliver's Taiwanese maple.
Now, Oliver's Taiwanese maple is a spectacular plant. We actually sold out of them, and then we've been going down and producing and trying to produce as many of these as we can. It's extremely heat tolerant, can handle full sun in Miami, so I'm pretty sure it can handle full sun around here.
This is a Korean maple. Acer liviarum subspecies formosanum is the specific name there.
And you'll find this in Korea and Taiwan, and it's extremely vigorous. Looks like a palmatum, leaves out as this orangish hue you've got here.
What you're seeing here is the early spring color. Most of the years too will be a dark Kelly green, and then excellent orange to reds in the fall.
And this here is actually a midsummer photo here, where you see you've got, you leafed out as that orangish red, it matures to a green. You see this green back here. This is actually the red new growth coming off on top of the green. And so it really just provides dynamic colors throughout the season. There's a fall color.
Bright oranges there on this picture. We've seen bright oranges to reds. There's an excellent example of this at the Gulf Coast Botanical Garden in Savannah. There's a very large, full specimen there of this tree. High heats, rough conditions, high winds, it really holds up well.
The bamboo farm there actually used to be one of the very first, one of the first national research stations. And so they, since donated to the UGA, but this was actually still in the ground from when they wild collected it from Taiwan, and it's a pretty spectacular tree. When you go there and you see this tree and you say, this tree's doing phenomenal down here in Savannah in full sun. It's been there for probably 30, 40 years, stood the test of time and all the crazy weather we've had here in the South. And you say, well, there's a lot of future for this other tree that's in section Palmata, just like a Japanese maple, looks like a Japanese maple, smells like a Japanese maple, but it's a Taiwanese
We should have
maple.
started our speech saying we're crazy and we drive anywhere to look at trees. Because people say, well, you're from the mountains of North Carolina, what do you know about heat-tolerant trees? We're kind of nuts, so we'll take off and drive to Houston if we hear somebody has something interested in full sun. We're like, really? Well, what are you doing next week? We got some extra time between gardens. So a lot of our photos are from trees we know that are specifically growing in very high heat conditions. Nacogdoches Azalea, this is one of the more frontiers, is some of these species are developing cultivars from these species like Pupi palmatum, Fabry, Olivieranum. Nacogdoches Azalea here is, a Benny often refers to a red. You'll see that a good bit in Japanese maples is red. Benny referring to a red form. On this first leaf south of the Olivieranum, it has more of a red tint to it. It will get to a green late summer. But again, a more heat tolerant red Japanese maple type. So it's going to be very high heat for extreme conditions.
Now with Nacogdoches Azalea, with Lillian's Jewel, a lot of these are ones that we may be sold out of at the time, but we may have them later on in the summer. These are also trees that we've been trialing, and we're actually probably one of the few nurseries in America with. And this is one of the ones that just leaps out with those deeper reds, and really, one of the things we're trying to do our best is look through these other Chinese maples, look like Japanese maples, smell like Japanese maples, like I say, and finding ones that have more ornamental characteristics and continually finding them. Because once we get to a red one of these that stays red all summer long, once we get to one of these, then we'll have trees that really, really can be used in the landscape in a lot of different areas. And like I'm saying, full sun Miami. So we can take Japanese maples to a whole new frontier.
Olivieranums are really tough, really heat tolerant species. Again, this is introduced by a friend of ours in Dallas, Keith Johansson, the president of Maple Society, introduced several of the truncatums. In fact, you'll see a giant specimen of fire dragon, which is his patented truncatum out here in the gardens here, a beautiful tree. Acer truncatums, again, they're tough as nails. These trees can handle full sun and high heat conditions. Oftentimes we have folks, who are in a high heat area like Columbia, South Carolina, and the South, and they'll say, I want something that's going to grow fast and shade out my other trees because I need some sun protection. This tree's going to put on about 3 to 4 feet a year of growth, so it's going to get out there pretty quick. You're looking at more of a 35-foot tree long term. But beautiful ornamental traits as well, and a deep, deep golden yellow fall color.
The neat thing about this tree is you get an early spring, bright yellow blooms. Bright yellow blooms on the tree. Much larger than a Japanese maple. You look at it and you say, oh, that's kind of neat. Then the leaf comes out. With this tree here, you've got, the reason why they're called dragons is because you have these extra lobes that sort of give the appearance of a Chinese dragon. Typically, Acer truncatum doesn't have all these extra lobes that you see here. If you just go look at Acer truncatum out in the wild, you go look at Acer truncatum in a lot of arboretums, you don't see these extra lobes.
So it gives it a more ornamental tree.
It almost looks like that beard of a Chinese dragon, which is really neat.
Large tree. Definitely go check out, and we'll look at it when we go through the fire dragon here in the garden. That's a beautiful tree. Very similar to golden dragon. Fire dragon's going to have a deep red fall color, where golden dragon has a deep yellow.
The other thing too is you get this almost like fissured, corky bark look to the Acer truncatums, which really gives a good, unique winter interest as well. And extremely heat tolerant, like I said. People will need shade. Great, excellent shade tree. Make shade tree fast. Great fall colors of a maple. A little more invasive root system, but just know that going forward, and you can use that in your planting.
Again, another cultivar here. This one's often described as Acer truncatum This is Akakazi Nishiki. Yano and Yano's Book for Maples, which is a published book in Japan, it's in half in Japanese, half in English, and you'll see that circulating in real. It's hard to find in America, but an excellent book. He lists this as Acer pictum dissectum Akakazi Nishiki. It actually may be a pictum. They're in the same family, and so it grafts onto both. So we don't know from that. But very, very heat-tolerant variegated maple. Bit of an odd form. It does have a dense full habit, typically at about the 9 to 12 foot range, and beautiful variegation. And this is a late summer photo of the variegation there on the Acer truncatum. The Acer truncatums are very tough trees, very full heat-tolerant form. And if you're looking for heat-tolerant variegates, these pictums, these truncatums, those are great areas to look for variegated plants that can handle very extreme high heats.
Would you put that in sun here?
I think you could. I would, you know, I think that wouldn't have a problem in full sun. I've seen it trialed in very high heat areas in full sun. I have a friend who, you know, a lot of these trees too, I have a friend who lives in the south of France, and he's Mediterranean in his climate, and he has a huge collection of several hundred maples. And he has Akakazi Nishiki in full sun in Toulouse, which is basically a Mediterranean area. And I wouldn't see a reason why it would definitely be hotter there than here. It is doing fine. It would be a tree you definitely want to increase the water amount on for full sun to keep back leaf burn, but it should be able to handle very high heat areas. Angio weeping.
Now, Angio weeping is actually a Acer Bergerionum selection that came from the Angio region in Japan, and some of our friends brought over and actually named Angio weeping. Acer Bergerionum is an excellent tree, can handle high heat, has exfoliating bark, and so you have this almost exfoliating bark as the plant matures. Looks pretty awesome and unique, and the leaf up close is that, and that's actually going to fall color there.
Acer Bergerionum is another great species for high heat. You know, often the answer to a lot of the high heat concerns are some of these other species that really handle it well. But again, the gardens here are a huge testament to palmatum. Creech, we were talking earlier, folks often ask him which palmatums do best in your garden. He says all of them. Because he's, you know, with such a large genre, when you spread out a collection, you can see all the different types. Well, hemiforms, dwarfs, uprights, lace leaves, you know, all these different categories of Japanese maples. They can all be grown in very, very warm conditions. Again, the Bergerionum, you'll see some excellent, there's a Naruto out here in the garden, which has more of a twisting upright leaf. A lot of these tridents are very high heat trees that can go in very high heat conditions. And it's going to be a little larger than most of your typical Japanese maples in section palmatum. Your tridents, this one's a weeping form, so it's not quite as tall. Most of your tridents are going to be a little larger specimens in the 25 to 30 foot range of maturity of an upright. This one tends to top out and be more cascading, so not very tall.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really the thing that really makes this one really unique and different, is that you have that almost umbrella habit going down, almost looks like a weeping cherry or something there, but then great, amazing fall color that you get out of the maple. Acer Bergerionum is an excellent tree for the future for the South too, and it's one we're looking through and trying to find as many different selections as we can.
A lot of these pictures too, as you see, they'll have that MrMaple.com logo. Not all these photos, but a lot of those, you can go on our website and check out the picture on there too if you want to check out a picture again that you made note of. Not everything will be on there. A few things like Lily and Jewel may not have huge availability yet, but there'll definitely be a lot of photos on there of this stuff. Any questions about heat-tolerant maples for the South?
So obviously you have a nursery and you ship.
Yes.
We do.
regularly.
Yeah, we were recommended in Southern Living in 2010 for shipping, and we do mail order all over the country. We actually just recently redid our boxing system. They come in a really interesting way. Our boxes have a built-in support system we've designed in the tree, in the box. So basically it just lays down in there, and you can turn the tree upside down and shake it, and it can't move around in the box any at all. But they come really securely, typically 3-day delivery through FedEx Ground, so they get there pretty quick. But we're shipping boxes. In fact, Monday morning we can get back and start shipping, because we'll be shipping all over. And we ship trees anywhere in the United States continuously.
And that's MrMaple.com. And You go through there, and there's probably 200 to 250 different cultivars on there with pictures and descriptions.
And really cheap
and
shipping too. We keep the shipping to the minimum. I mean, we want folks to get their trees. So like our 1 gallon shipping for just one individual 1 gallon.
It's $12.
For most anywhere in the United States, our 3 gallon size shipping is like 24 maybe. And we just keep it very simple and cheap for the most part. We just, that's just our.
We basically take the cost of FedEx shipping and then add on the cost of the box. And
for multiple trees, we can even,
that's it.
multiple trees in boxes.
Yeah, we can actually ship 2 trees in a box. And even for 1 gallon, if someone calls us and wants to, we can actually ship up to 6 trees or maybe even more in 1 gallons in a box.
So given our climate, which is going to warm up someday soon, when would you say is the latest we should ask for trees from you for this season?
Well, we actually
Good question.
ship year round, so it's a great time. The best time, I always say the best time to plant trees is not when the ground's frozen. So I try to avoid, hard freezes on the ground. We plant year round. In fact, we shipped 30 trees last year to Houston in July.
It wasn't last year, it was 2 years ago when they had the heat spike to 124.
Yeah.
And that was shipped semi-bare root. What we actually do is we spray our trees when we're shipping with it's called Nature Shield, and it keeps the plants from losing moisture during shipping.
Stops the transpiration.
The only thing that you have to worry about when you're getting that plant for the first year is making sure that you're watering it for if you're getting it in July, you need to water it for the first year. If you're getting it in the spring, make sure you're watering it until it gets established, and continue watering it whenever you have a drought. Make sure that plant, but as long as you water that plant, you can actually get that plant any time of the year from us because we're actually growing it in a container. And we actually don't ship semi-bare root anymore, the way our system works. So it's even safer than...
They all come in the container, 1 gallon.
And I checked with the lady too who we ship semi-bare root to, and her plants are doing fantastic. And she got them semi-bare root when we had the 120-degree heat spikes down here a few years ago. And it's just the way we ship, the way we do our trees. And we try to focus on a good root system. And we actually grow our own understock too, so that it gives us a little more advantage.
Our root systems, my grandmother didn't know she was setting us up to do a nursery. She started collecting seedling Japanese maples in the 50s. And a lot of what our root systems are from trees she took from Charleston, South Carolina, and brought to East Flat Rock, North Carolina in the early 50s. And so they've kind of been through the full gamut of terrible southern weather now. They've had the extreme heats of Charleston and the coast, and they've had the cold of the mountains, but it really does make a big difference in some of those extreme temperature years versus things brought from the West Coast. So we really have found a big difference in growing our own rootstock for cold hardness as well as extreme heats. One thing about our containers too, you can leave them in those containers for up to a year as long as you're watering. They're in a nursery grade mix, and so a lot of folks can order a tree in, and then if you only like fall planting, it's an easy thing to hang on to. You don't have to just keep it in the shadier area so you're not watering as much. But we ship year round. We never stop. People always ask when we stop, and we don't, but we have great success with it because we take the utmost care of the shipping process too.
You ship rootstock?
We don't yet. We actually have looked into actually providing rootstock for a lot of the South. We recently bought out a custom liner business, and so we've actually had to bring rootstock in for one of the first times ever for us.
And by bringing rootstock in, I mean we purchased a nursery that had rootstock.
About 8,000 rootstocks. Yeah, but so we actually had to use rootstocks that we didn't grow for one of the first times. So we're producing, like this year, to give you an idea, since January we've grafted right about 12 to 15,000 maples. And so you can look at our hands. I think you cut this and just steam comes out right now from all the cows. But right now we're not at a point where we're able to produce rootstock. We've thought about providing rootstock for the South. We're just producing too many maples to stop grafting right now.
Well, a couple of years ago, we took a grafting class, and outside of the one experience, we haven't had the opportunity to do any more.
Sure. I'll give you some great names of some folks that sell in smaller quantities too. So, if you ask me after, there's some folks that'll sell down to smaller amounts.
And also a great thing to do too, find some Acer palmatum in your area, green small leaves, collect the seed, you can stratify them in your fridge, you can grow them yourself as well. And on a smaller scale, if you need to, if you're wanting to learn how to graft and do more of that, that's obvious. I mean, that's how we got started.
One of the reasons that's very good too is because that more slowly grown seedling that you're growing, if you don't fertilize it, you just naturally pot up some seedlings and you're growing slower. If you're not doing it from a production standpoint, you can afford to wait. you're going to have a larger candy, and so you're actually going to have a
Higher
better yield
percent
on a
yield.
slowly grown tree than you would on a tree that's been heavily pushed with fertilizers. We'll get into that a little bit with the grafting side.
And you can graft one that's been pushed too, but you have to take more care with it.
Any more questions about heat-tolerant maples?
Fabulous. I think it's a good time for.
Probably a good time for a break here.
All right, thank y'all.
We'll get set up for the grafting.
Sounds good.
How are we doing with time, Barbara?
And just reiterate what a wonderful collection this is here.
Not
I probably
just
should have even said before I started, but you're very fortunate to live next to this arboretum and this collection. It's a true treasure. It's one of the best maple collections in the United States. And you'll find a lot of trees here that you won't find specimens this size or this splendor anywhere else. I mean, a lot of the big maple producers are out in the Pacific Northwest, and you'll find larger specimens of some of these than you'll find anywhere in the Pacific Northwest right here. And so it really is a treasure.
And it's a true testament to Japanese maples, a true testament to Japanese maples here in the South, and a true testament to the good work they're doing here at SFA.
But as maple geeks, which I think we qualify for maple geeks, it really is a treasure, and it really is. It's just wonderful to see what's going on here, and a wonderful maple collection. We'll get out there and do it more, but that's just a really, really fine display. We're going to get into some grafted Japanese maples now. Propagation, one of the most talked about types, one of the most popular talks we do on Japanese maples is how to produce them. Everybody wants to learn about grafting. How do you do it? How does it work? Why is it important? And we'll get into that with you a little bit here. This presentation is called the ABCs of Maple Propagation. We presented a very similar talk to this a few weeks ago for a class at the University of Tennessee, and it was great. It was really well received. I think the grafts are doing pretty good too. So we'll see.
And this presentation is actually what we gave in when we also presented our first academic article, which is the ABCs of Japanese maple propagation.
So now, when people say you're an idiot, I can say yes, but we're an internationally published idiot because we have IPPS proceedings. So this is very similar to what we did at the International Plant Propagator Society. Getting into the ABCs of Japanese maples. Basically, first we'll talk about why graft. Japanese maples are a higher quality tree when they're grafted. We do 99% of our production in our nursery from grafted material. You certainly can root Japanese maples. People are always saying, well, I root a Japanese maple. Of course you did. I've rooted thousands. It's easy to do. It's not something you can't do. But from a production standpoint and for a quality standpoint, a graft is a more quality tree.
And the main reason being is whenever you have a rooted Japanese maple, we're more susceptible to catching a couple different maple diseases, Pseudomonas and Verticillium aboetrum. And it's just because often the tree will actually produce not the full root system, but will produce a clonal root system. And it's just more susceptible to disease. And because of that, there's been tons of other maple producers out there who've said, well, I rooted Acer palmatum, subspecies palmatum, I can root Cereus, I can root, a few different Japanese maples. I'm going to start a whole nursery and just root my Japanese maples. They root their Japanese maples, they put them out in the fields. First year, they have 50% of them die. Next year, they have a certain percent of them die. And by the time it gets done, they have a small amount of Japanese maples to sell, and then what happens is they sell that tree and it dies on the next customer. We're not saying that every tree is going to die you root either, because there's actually some trees out here in SFA that have been rooted. I mean, there's some nice autohemes that Dr. Creech has rooted, and they make phenomenal trees.
But from a production standpoint, for a quality standpoint, it's a great way to do it is to graft a tree.
Exactly.
One of the reasons we also graft Japanese maples is all these different named varieties are called cultivars. And so a cultivar of Japanese maple is basically something that's been selected. And someone said, I really, really like these traits. Let's continue to produce this. And so how do we do it? Well, from seed, they don't come back true to form. So if you took something like that red emperor we looked at in the last slideshow, and you collected seeds off of a very large red emperor, well, a certain set of them may look similar to the original plant, but you couldn't call those trees red emperor. They have different traits. We couldn't say that it's going to have that bright red fall color. We couldn't say that it would be 10 to 15 feet in 10 years. That kind of, those kind of properties fall out the window because there's a lot of variability within the seedlings of Japanese maples.
Also, for certain upright Japanese maples, you may get a less desirable shape. A lot of times rooted cuttings will actually try to start, for Japanese maple, will start trying to form a more shrubby type Japanese maple. And if you're looking for an upright tree, you may end up with something that you're not exactly quite looking for. You may have to have a little more pruning, a little more work to get the exact shapes you're looking for.
And certain types of trees, it would just be very, very poor from a production standpoint. A Matsumuri style or a lace leaf style leaf, where you have the most popular, probably the most popular trees we do are the cascading Japanese maple that people think of first when they think of a Japanese maple. You could root those, but from a production standpoint, you get a very poor yield. I mean, it would take you forever to get any. I mean, it might root 100 to get 3 of that style tree. It just doesn't root very well on its own roots. In fact, the tree doesn't very much like being on its own roots anyway. And so when you find a lace leaf seedling, oftentimes grafting that onto a good root system saves that tree, that seedling. Whenever we see a really interesting lace leaf in a nursery, we're like, better graft that quick because it might not live on its own roots. So by getting it onto this more preferred root system, it actually makes it a more quality plant.
And so what we're talking about with a grafted Japanese maple is that we're talking about actually putting a healthy root system, of a fully developed root system, underneath a set of desirable traits that will then make a beautiful tree for the landscape or yard. And that's basically why we graft, is that we're adding a vigorous root system to this. A lot of these cultivars aren't vigorous or aren't good growers or might not even be able to handle the heat on their own roots. Now some of them can, but a lot of them, like butterfly or some of these variegates or different types, if you have one of their own roots, it's going to be a really, really small tree. If you go out and you find some of these original, very first seedling they found, and they said this is really unique and different, and it's variegated or something unusual, often be much smaller than the very first graft that's on it, that's from it, because that second graft has a vigorous, healthy root system.
It improves the tree overall.
And it improves the health and quality of the tree overall.
So essentials of grafting. We've got 3 main categories. We break it down, the ABCs of grafting. First step there, advanced planting, and the third step there, you see care of grafts. Those are by far the most important parts of grafting. Everybody wants to focus on the blades in motion there. Sometimes we call that one the blades of glory category, because everybody's like, that's the only part anybody wants to talk about in a grafting demonstration.
And the cut is important, but even if you master the cut and you don't master the advanced planting or the care of the grafts, you're not going to get a good take.
So with grafting a Japanese maple, the A and the C are 90% of the whole overall product there. That middle part is the most simple part. I mean, it's a very rudimentary cut. It's just what you do. The actual difficulty is maintaining that advanced planting and aftercare. And so we'll get into these 3 different steps for you here of grafting Japanese maples.
And one thing to say here too, this is how we graft. This is how we graft to success. There are lots of other people who graft, and this is how we graft Japanese maples with success. You can talk to a million different grafters and find a million different ways of grafting, but this is how we're successful with grafting, and this is also how we think you could be successful with grafting. And once you learn how to graft a Japanese maple, you can pretty much graft any other tree, because it's often much easier than a Japanese maple.
Japanese maples have a small cambium, and they're very, once you master that art of that, you'll find fruit trees or pecans or much, much simpler. I mean, a lot of the other types of grafts, conifers, most of those are going to be so much more simple than a Japanese maple. And again, too, a really easy process. As Tim was saying, as many grafters as you could get in a room, that's how many different opinions on how to do it you would get. Because everybody has their own method, and what's right is what works for you. So if you see things you like out of this, you can always take them and adapt them. A lot of the things we've done, everything we really do as far as a grafting style we took pieces that we liked of the way other people did things. Maybe not everything, but we said, I like that modified side veneer that really cleans up nice, and I like how it's not noticeable as a graft long term. We're going to take that aspect of it. We're going to take this humidity aspect of it. A lot of these things. And so you definitely can pick and choose what parts you like, and certain things work in different areas. A lot of high heat people in high heat climates will do summer grafting. We primarily do winter grafting from a production standpoint because we have a longer window to winter graft there. And so we do the majority of our production in winter grafting. So for our presentation, a lot of this will be about winter grafting, but summer grafting is another form and easy to do as well.
And the main thing for it is timing. With Japanese maples, the one thing you want is your plants hardened off to a certain size where they're about ready to go through the next flush of growth. It's true with summer, it's true with winter. During the winter, with timing, you want to make sure that those roots are just turning white. That means that those roots are just now starting activated. They're ready to, when you make a cut on it, it's going to heal quickly. That's all you're looking for. You're looking for making that tree, as soon as it's been cut, to make that heal quickly, because essentially when you're grafting, all you're doing is you're making a cut on it, a surgical cut, and you're wanting that to heal as quickly as you can so that the scion and the rootstock grow together.
So if you're only doing a few grafts for a novelist standpoint, I recommend going out there and pulling the whole understock out of the container and looking at the root system and looking for those white microfibrous roots if you want to see those forming.
Now, to talk about this a little simpler too, the scion is what we call the cutting we're taking off of the cultivar, the variety that we're continuing on specific traits.
So the scion's just the trimming of the tree we want to produce. So the scion, that's S-C-I-O-N, that's just what we want to produce. So I'm going to show you an example of a scion right here real quick too. He has a trimming right there. This is off of a tree. Basically what we're looking at as a scion is something this size. This is off of cultivar of Sakazuki. It's going to be a small, see, what we're looking for, really all we need is 2 sets of these terminal buds. What you want to make sure, and you'll see down here at the bottom with scion wood selection, what you want to make sure of when you're doing this process is that the buds are alive and healthy. So you actually want to inspect the wood you're cutting a good bit. One of the main failures people make is grafting wood that can be too dried out or dead, or maybe the buds are damaged. So you want to make sure you actually have a healthy, viable scion to graft when you're doing that part. Now we'll pass this around so you can kind of get a look at what a scion looks like. It doesn't have to be that many buds. Typically for us, if it's a first choice for a scion, it's going to be 2 sets of terminal buds with good fat, thick size to it. Now let the rootstocks dry out. That's very important. When you're grafting, this is what we would consider a rootstock here beside Tim. These are just Acer palmatum, subspecies palmatum. They're a very basic small leaf green Japanese maple. Some people graft the red Japanese maples or different types. We prefer Acer palmatum, subspecies palmatum, because it's very consistent. It has a very good root system. It heals readily, and it just makes an excellent understock for everything. It works for most things, and so across the board it does very well. We have our own rootstock selected for ability to heal, heat tolerance, cold tolerance, how durable is it helping improve the tree. And so you should always be putting something on a healthy, good-looking root system. If you put it on a poor or unhealthy root system, it's just starting the tree off on the wrong foot right away.
And with letting the rootstocks dry, that's extremely important during the winter. It's extremely important during the summer too. Some people talk about summer grafting. They say, well, when they're grafting it, they 2 weeks beforehand, they start drying out the rootstock, and they get it to the point to where it's not dead, and it's not dried out too much, but it's very, very, very dry. And then after they've grafted it, and then they start watering a little bit, so the plant will start healing together.
So another aspect of that, we've kind of skipped all around here in order, but growing in container. We like to have all of our root systems grown in the container they're going to be grafted in for a minimum of 1 year before we graft them. A recently repotted tree is not going to be taking up energy as efficiently. That root system is going to struggle. And what you don't want is a tree that's not ready to heal. The more that root system has been in that root, that band pot size, it's going to be more likely to heal at a quicker rate because it's established. It's not struggling to put on roots at the same time that's needing to heal. So that's very important in the process. Now we typically grow our rootstocks until they're about pencil thick. That's ideal for us. You want your root system to be well established. These have actually been cut back a little bit to thicken them up midsummer.
Now this is the part that everyone always focuses on. The main things you want to remember here is that when you make a cut, you want to be safe with it because you're dealing with a knife. A lot of times when people are grafting, they cut their fingers. We've done it. Everyone does it.
I always say the first rule of thumb when it comes to grafting is don't cut your thumb. That sounds silly, but it's easy to do. And if you're going to graft, as many as we've been grafting this year in the 12 to 15,000 range, you're going to get cuts, you're going to get nicks. Protect your hands. Utmost importance. I think when I cut my hand right now, nothing even happens from all the cows that are grafted.
One of the most important things about grafting, when you're grafting a Japanese maple, to keep is safety. And the safety aspect, one, keep a sharp, clean knife. and I say a sharp, clean knife. One, you want to keep it sharp. A sharp knife will make a cleaner cut. If it makes a cleaner cut, you're less likely to be sitting there doing this, struggling, and then slip off and cut your finger.
If you see somebody doing this number right here on their rootstock, that knife isn't sharpened properly, and you better back up because it's going right through, and they're going to be slinging a blade around somewhere. So that's why we call this one blades in motion, because there's only a very specific way you want to do it. What we use is a Tina 606 and Tina 605 grafting knives. We use professional grade grafting knives because they hold their sharpness very well for the long term. Because we're doing a lot of numbers, we don't want that blade to dull up on us. But Tim will hold this up so you can kind of see. Now what this actually has is one side sharpened on the blade, and so the other side's flat, so it's a one-sided blade. And what that allows us to do, our dad's left-handed, so he has a left-handed blade. What that allows us to do is to put that flat side up against the tree when we're making our cut and make just one smooth cut.
Thank you.
But safety is by far the key, and the first step, as Tim alluded to, is a very well-sharpened knife.
Now,
You want to work on your knife weeks in advance before grafting anything, because the biggest mistake is a dull knife. It's not going to get a clean cut. You're going to have a low yield, and you're going to cut your finger because it's not going to clean.
you might have also heard me say surgical procedure earlier. That's how you should treat this when you're grafting. We're cutting scions out. We're taking those cuttings off of those trees you're wanting to produce, those scions. What do you need to do? Use rubbing alcohol to clean your trimmers. You're making cuts on a tree. If you have a disease or something on one tree or a fungus, you don't want to spread it onto those. You don't want to spread it to your grafts. And sometimes you might not be able to see it. It's best to always play it safe. If you have trimmers, anytime you're cutting on your plants in your landscape, take some people use a 10% bleach solution. That'll also make sure that you're killing, any issues, but not actually hurting the trees when you're making the cuts. So rubbing alcohol or 10% bleach solution is a great way to make sure that you're being clean when you're making these cuts.
As far as cutting your scion wood, there's a lot of different ways, and we have different trimmers here. You see our trimmer down there. Like Tim said, we're going through and cleaning those trimmers continuously. What you want there is just, this is actually a hammer method. I like to use a little concave trimmers we have as well. We have some Joshua Roth concave trimmers we use a lot of times. And what you want it to be there is just conscious of the tree, that you're not decimating the overall shape of the tree you're grafting from. And just be conscious where you're collecting scion wood. The best scion wood is going to be the last year's growth. And so what you actually want for scion material is an old wood. If there's nothing else available, you may want to graft that just to get that cultivar, if that's what it means to save. But what you actually want are last year's flushes of new growth.
And you notice
you're going to have the best yield on that material.
You notice this growth is one solid piece going straight up. It doesn't have side branches coming off to the side. If it has side branches coming off to the side, that's second year growth. Well, how do you get growth like this if you don't have it? You can cut your tree back and it'll flush back out growth like this the next year.
Jim, you want to start doing a little bit of demonstration?
I would say do a little bit of the cut, and then we'll do the pre-care and then do that afterwards.
All right.
So let's talk about lining up the cambium and cutting the understock. So basically, whenever you're cutting your trees, if you hold that for a second, what you're actually wanting to do is one solid motion. So when you're cutting on the understock, you're going to go like here, left to right.
So you want that to be a very smooth motion, that cut. When you're cutting, you don't want to be pushing in or bearing down. That's how you cut through your tree again. So what we do is a smooth right to left cut, and just let the knife do all the work. If it's a well-sharpened knife, you're not going to need to put a lot of pressure on there. It's just a very smooth cut, and that left to right motion, it does the job. That's all that needs to happen.
And the scion you have to cut with motion as well. And
when we cut our scion wood, you'll see a lot of folks, in fact, my dad cuts all his scion material this way. And he's been doing it that way for 40 years, he ain't changing. But I don't think it's as consistent of a cut. What we do is, for our grafts, are called a modified side veneer graft. Basically, it's a two-part wedge, and so we're making a little wedge here out of the scion that will then line up on the rootstock. The reason we do this is because we feel it's one of the best at cleaning up. And I had a lady a couple years ago come up to us at a garden show, and she said, "I don't believe any of these are grafted. I can't find them. The graft marks." I said, "You paid me the best compliment you could possibly give us as grafted. We don't want it to look grafted." I mean, that's the exact opposite of, we want it to look one smooth motion. And that's why we do a modified side veneer graft. Because in about that 4th to 5th year, it's very unnoticeable where that graft union is, and that's ideal. So I'm going to go ahead and make a smooth cut on this one little scion here. What we do is we graft in front of ourselves like this, and again I'm holding the smooth side of the blade is toward me, and the sharpened side of the blade is this way. And the way we do it is we just make one consistent motion like this. And so by this continued motion here, flip it over and make another continued motion. This is a lot more consistent of a body movement than this or however else you're cutting it. And so what that's going to do is it's going to leave you with a smoother, cleaner cut long term.
And the same angles on both sides, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to create a flat wedge. So you want
Pick those up.
it to look like this without many dips.
So basically what you're creating is a small little wedge on both sides of the graft. And typically one side of our graft is smaller than the other. And that side that's a little bit larger, we're using that against the rootstock to line up. Now typically when we're cutting our understock, we come in here to cut into a rootstock. We'll pull one up closer here in a minute, so we'll do that one closer where you can all come up and look. When we're cutting this part of the tree, what we want to do here again is that side-to-side motion. This is where we're going to put our scion on the Japanese maple. So when we cut this, we just want a very smooth, small lip. And that's what we're looking for there. In fact, we'll pass that around if you'd like to see
Now,
that.
the key to this is to not cut through deep into the tree. You want to make a very thin cut. If you cut through the center of the tree, what happens is that your tree actually ends up dying a lot of times because you just cut through the heart of it. And you actually can kill the understock or kill the graft because you've cut too deeply. So you want to cut this as thinly as you can, but still make it just a small amount of lip that you can see here. And that's really the hardest part, is creating a flat cut there. And the way you do it is you line your knife up against the back side of that rootstock when you're cutting. So you just line that back up and then pull it down slowly, and it makes a very thin cut. That's one of the advantages of having that one-sided knife. You know, when we first started out, we were actually grafting with razor blades, two-sided. What happens? You cut deeper, you kill more understock, you have a much lower yield. And whenever each graft ends up taking you with us when we're faster, it's about 2 to 3 minutes a piece. I mean, you think about trying to do 15,000, 20,000 grafts, how much time you're wasting if you're cutting through and killing a bunch of understock.
Really, it seems too simple, but every step along the process, if you're thinking about the knife being sharp, the cleanliness of what you're doing, between each set of grafts, so once I've grafted, like say this is Sakazuki style, once I've grafted that, then I move on, I clean my trimmers and I clean my knife before I do the next set, so they're going to be as clean as possible through each step of the process.
Do your scions always have the growing tip?
Do what?
Have the growing tip?
Oh, the terminal, yeah. Not necessarily, but it does help. With Japanese maples, it doesn't affect the overall shape of the tree like it does in some plants. Like if you're grafting a
Conifer.
Cyananthus retusa or something like that, it may actually affect the growth rate of the tree to have that middle budding. With Japanese maples, it tends to not. So you can actually use new growth from the middle.
So on that one that has 2 sets of terminals, we could actually cut that in 2 and use 2 separate ones.
Now we need to make sure when the tree was growing that we had, we maintained one central leader. But it shouldn't affect the overall growth of the tree.
What do you clean your knife with? And
What we do is we'll just take a rag, and then we'll have rubbing alcohol. That's what we
Just
use.
wipe that down continuously. Now what I'm actually going to demonstrate here real quickly is the next step here. We'll let all of y'all, when we finish what we'll do with this other one, is just have everybody come up around the table so you can see it real close. But for demonstration purposes, we'll just do one here. And the easiest way to line up your rootstock is to take the rootstock here in your hand and put your thumb up against the very bottom of the cut there. And take your scion and place it at the very back, and then just lift that forward until the two line up. But what you want to do is line up the cambions there.
And the cambion,
So ideally, you're going to create a cut on the rootstock and on the scion that are equal in length.
and so what the cambium is that's the little layer of green that you see right on the inside of the rootstock, so your seedling, and on the inside of your scion that you're producing. And so you're just lining those two up, and basically you're lining those two up, tying them together rubber band. Some people will then there's a million different ways to do the next step. You can use buddy tape, tie around it. Basically, you can use grafting wax, put around it. You can use grafting, what is it called? The black
Buddy tape
With
or tree coat.
tree coat. You can put tree coat on it. The idea is that you're trying to keep a higher humidity around that graft, around that graft. You're trying to keep it together so it doesn't fall off, so it'll actually heal together. Because like I said before, all you're doing is you're trying to create a heel.
All right, now in tying off the scion to the tree, what we want to do is go up the tree, and so we're continuing to push those two cambiums together.
His thumb's actually holding the bottom part of the rubber band as he's tying it.
What I like to do is
You going
take,
up?
now, until I take the pressure, once I've wrapped up the tree and I've secured that in place, and I take and I wrap back down, and so that we're creating the pressure where the tie-off is going to be lower on the tree. And all that's really doing is making sure that you're not creating a wedge where you're pushing that scion continuously and misaligning. Because that alignment really is the whole process right there for the cuts. Now, what we typically do at our nursery after this stage is we'd have heated paraffin wax. And we just wax that over. A lot of folks don't do that step anymore, but we're kind of old school. It's how our dad taught us to do it. We get a good yield that way. So we continue just to wax that over with a very lukewarm paraffin wax, not hot. You don't want to burn the tree there.
Now, this stage here, while this is the most technical aspect, I guess, it is not the most important aspect. Because once you get it to here, it's all about the next one, the care of the grafts. And I can graft this here, and I can say, oh, here's a graft. But if you don't do the next part, it's not going to take.
Oftentimes we'll go and do grafts, when we do this seminar, and then we'll hear back later and they'll say, well, none of the grafts took. We'll say, well, did you do the post-care part? Well, no. That was the most important part. So really, if you go to a lot of the big nurseries who are producing 20 and 30,000 maples, a lot of very unskilled laborers are doing all the cutting part. And a lot of very high-paid people are taking care of the pre-care and the post-care and all the parts that really matter. But those are the really skilled jobs here. That's the part you have to pay the most attention to.
Humidity is the key. I mean, humidity. No matter how you do it, if you're summer grafting, people will grab a little bag and put over each little graft. Or they'll put them in a tent, a small tent that keeps the humidity. And I say a tent, I don't mean like a camping tent, I mean like a sheet of plastic over a small little cold frame or something. Sometimes people even stick a humidifier in there. Humidity is the key.
On our 96 by 22-foot grafting house, which is completely, we can't put a single tray more in there this year. We filled it so full of grass that I think we're going to have to start putting another out. We're going to find things that took and take them out to put some more in this year when we graft it when we get back. But we actually have a home humidifier in that whole house, and so it's just a dense humidity in there. We keep that humidity above 80% if we can keep it there. And it just helps that healing process.
Now the next thing is avoid high temperatures. We might ask, well, how do you avoid high temperatures down here? Well, there's a couple of different ways. You can use fans, you can use a lot of different things. The main thing is you don't want it to try to get in the 80s, to 80s to 100s on your actual graft when it's making the first healing process for a Japanese maple.
And that could be with your timing too. You want to make sure that you're timing that in your area so that you can do it at a point where it's not going to be so warm that it forces that graft to leaf out. Because you don't want to force the scion material to leaf out too early. Because it could dry out and just die.
And on top of that, you don't want extremely high heat because it's got to heal together so that it can take nutrients up to the cutting, the scion you grafted onto it.
We never allow our grafts to get below 40 degrees, 35 to 40, and we never let them get above 75 to 80. We try to keep in that range of temperatures. We don't keep our house continuously at 65 degrees, we spend too much on propane, but once things get down to that, chilling factor, around about 40, we like that house to kick on and warm up, because you don't want your grafts to just go to those extremes. But that middle area of 40 to 75 is right where you want to be, temperature-wise. So you want to kind of maintain that. And if you do it at the right time of the year, you really don't have a long window. And you can schedule this so if you're just grafting 5 to 10 trees, that window for you at a certain point of healing could be 8 days, 10 days, 15 days. So it's not necessarily a long process you have to have a whole big greenhouse for.
In fact, if you're summer grafting down here, you might not want a greenhouse because it may get too hot inside that greenhouse. And so the main thing you want to do is make sure that you keep your plants as dry as you can without killing the plant. I mean, that's really the key during this stage is keeping the plant as dry as you can without killing the plant so that it will heal together. As soon as you start to see the buds starting to swell a little bit that you've grafted on this here, as soon as you start seeing the buds swelling up a little bit larger, then you say, all right, now it's time to water.
Now this next step of the process is pretty important as well, removing the humidity. You've got all these nice, flush, beautiful grafts, and you've grafted them and they've leafed out. And now you need to slowly reduce the amount of humidity and wean them off that so that you're not shocking the tree. You take a little fresh graft directly outside and wham, it went from 80% humidity to barely any. It's going to not live. It's going to shock the tree too hard.
Or if you're using the bag method, you've got a little bag, you just cut part of the bag and you put it over top of the graft, tie it off with a twist tie from like from your bread. I mean, it's simple to do, but you've got higher humidity right around that graft, so it takes at a higher rate. Well, then you see the graft starting to leaf out in there. You need to cut part of the bag, but still leave the bag on there, and then slowly start, weaning it off of that bag. Because if you take that humidity off immediately, oftentimes the graft will just shrivel up.
You've got delicate new growth there on that small young tree. You don't want to overshock it there. And then the last step here for reducing, we've actually left this sap stump here on this tree. I didn't talk about that earlier, but as I was demonstrating it. But see this right here, we originally, say we had a tree this large when we started to graft it. We'll cut our rootstock back and we'll leave this extended area here. And this just leaves an area for excess sap in the tree to flood out without flooding this graft. Ideally, you won't have too much because you dried the rootstock out a lot. But as you have excess graft, and this is waxed, so it's not drowning the graft, any excess sap can flow out of this. Well, after this is leafed out, and this is a beautiful young tree established right here, you can come back with your trimmers and then reduce that as well. So you're going to even clean this up a little bit more. And that way, all you have growing on from there on is the scion, the cultivar. So we're going to reduce the rootstock at the last step and let the scion continue to grow. Now for a really quality tree too, of certain types, depending on the types, for an upright, you don't want that graft to be very high up in the air to begin with. 3 to 4 inches for an upright tree is ideal. Something like Red Emperor, you wouldn't want to see that grafted, or even say Sangucaca with the coral bark.
We try to graft those extremely low to the ground.
You wouldn't want to see that grafted 1.5 foot up because it would make a very noticeable understock.
Green bark, then coral bark.
In fact, a lot of our like the Nishiki-gawa, the types that have the rough bark, those are so popular for bonsai enthusiasts. We'll actually lift the tree almost up and almost just be grafted right into the root. So that's so low on the ground that when they want to put that in that bonsai tray, it's not very noticeable, the difference there. But the last step then, we would come in there and reduce this sap stump, and cut the rootstock once more. And when you do that, you do it late in the season after this is already leafed out. And that energy in this is going to give one more push, and so you'll see an excess of growth here on the scion when that's cut.
2 key things here. Removing the rubber band and removing the understock. When you remove the understock, you need to do it before the understock actually starts taking back over. This is the dominant genetics of this plant right now. It's going to try to outgrow this graft here. So until you cut this off, it's going to continue to grow. And so it'll put out more buds here, more things, and it'll take energy away from your graft that could have been used in getting your graft bigger and healthier. And so that's really important. The other thing is once, it's been, 3 or 4 weeks after you've grafted, during the summer, or say it was, the plant's leafed out, you're going to need to start removing that rubber band because that rubber band can actually girdle your grafts.
We'll take a fingernail and just kind of scratch the wax beside and get down below the rubber band. We start to see the nice little lines where the unions form between the two. It's kind of a white little callus formed there. And you have a good callus there. You still need to be kind of careful because you could actually, if you left too much understock, you could get such a push that when you took your rubber band off, you could water it and just weigh it off. So you got to be careful there at the right timing. That's crucial. And so that's where you're going to reduce that rootstock. And those key cares right there are crucial in grafting Japanese maples. And it really opens you up to producing a huge diversity of trees. As we were talking about earlier, you can see around the pictures here, just a huge mix of maples. And most things are going to go on Acer palmatum. There's some different types of understocks for different trees. They're different sections. Most of the trees we're talking about today were in section palmata. So all those things like Shirasawanums, Japonicums, Sabolianums, all those are able to graft onto just palmatum understock. And so we're grafting all these, wildly different, like the Acer Japonicum up there with the flower on it, onto the same understock that we're grafting very basic small leaf green trees too. Any other questions about grafting? And we'll cut that part, and then we can come up, have everybody walk around, and we'll kind of show it up close demonstration of it.
We want to know how you tie that rubber band so quickly.
Sure. Well, it's one thing you start to learn. It's like tying a little, rubber balloon or something. You learn about it as you do it more. I'll show you this one again.
That's what happens when you
lift your tree by the container when it's wet.
And that's also what happens when the rootstock hasn't grown in the container for 4
It
years.
hadn't been in the container for 4 years.
I actually pulled one of our next year's rootstocks
We'll sweep that in.
for this.
It's good
So-
to see experts have problems too.
We wanted to add a little bit of comedy here to the end of this. It's going too smooth.
Just don't cut yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be bad. So what we're basically doing with rubber band, I take this hand, I put the rubber band around it, I secure it with this hand, and all I do is pull it down tight. And then I overlap it around, and that's going to hold it in place once I've overlapped it to itself. And then I'm just going